The agenda is there has been, the high school has a family engagement steering committee that's composed of quite a few teachers. And one thing that they did last year that was effective that they would like to do again this year is to change the family engagement evening activity from May 16th to January 18th. And the purpose that they explained was that the change was made last year, and it helps support the scheduling process towards the end of the year if that May date is left open. Therefore, providing the family engagement night in January. I agreed with them. I said I would bring it to the board's attention. We have to let the teachers know, I believe it's 60 days in advance.
Contractually 60 days.
So if we do it tonight or next school board meeting, that would allow us enough time to be able to make that change and to help support what that steering committee is asking for.
And we support this. It makes much more sense to move this to that time when they have the need that's unique to the senior high.
Since this is the second year in a row, we just automatically schedule it for January for next year?
Yeah, we're looking at maybe changing the whole way we do this next year. We've been meeting with the union about the pros and cons of it and the effectiveness of doing 4. We might go to 2 and then use those other nights for data nights. We're talking about different things, but whatever we come up with, I think you're right. And rather than do it and then have to undo it, it's probably smart to get that schedule ahead of time.
Seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I don't see Jason O'Leary here, but this is a trip down memory lane. So we got an email from the high school today asking, or not today, this recently, asking about the music production course that was approved by the board. I didn't remember ever approving any music production course, so we went back through the old minutes. Turns out that we've actually discussed this twice. One several years ago during COVID, and then once last summer, where this committee actually did approve the addition of a course on music production, right on cue. There he is. Music production, and Mr. O'Leary, if I speak and I speak incorrectly, please correct me. But music production is a course really based on, oddly enough, producing music. Think of music recording, a recording studio where students could mix music, go into a sound room and record music, make songs that could be published on Spotify or Amazon or all these different things. And it was really an elective course that was geared toward getting students who are not traditionally into music interested in music, which we definitely support. And then another outlet for some of those students who are really gifted in music to really take their music to the next level. And again, like I said, this is really just revisiting. I don't know what happened, why it went from the academic committee and never made it to the board meeting, but it didn't. So it was never board approved, although the committee minutes say that the committee supports this and we'd like to move it forward. So I'd like to bring it back to make sure that we're still okay with everything. And before I put it on the board agenda for Monday night, you have a question.
Wasn't there some holdup or some issue with the space that they were going to use? It had to be studied and
there is a little issue with
and I thought it was going to the building and grounds committee or something.
And that might have been the hang up. Maybe that
I think
is.
so.
That was an issue.
It was going to be a bunch of remodeling of that big storage room. And
The air exchange, yes. So there is, well, I'll let Jason talk about this because I think he knows more than I do.
Or something, storage room or something.
Yeah, they're basically taking the music storage room and repurposing part of it for this, correct?
Yeah, the library that's behind the main room there is the spot we're talking about. And I know Cheney was over there this morning. And I think they had a gentleman in there and said it's feasible to do that and kind of got some ideas of what that would look like for how they would do that. They might even work out a quote, to my knowledge, to see what that would end up being. But I know they were there this morning to take a look at that and see how they would do that.
I thought that was the.
You have a good
I thought
memory,
was-
Sid.
Well, I thought that, because
I'll say.
I
I
think that's a
agree.
good thing, but then there was something about where it was going to go and it
Yeah.
had to go to building and grounds and have whatever, so.
So buildings and grounds dropped the ball on it.
Yeah.
Possibly. All I know is. And maybe it was me or maybe it was Mike, I don't know, but whatever it was in this committee and then it doesn't show up on any board minutes. So I just wanted to make sure that we at least were approved to take the next step, or if we do need to do a little work on buildings and grounds, we take that next step, but
It didn't make the follow-up list.
it did not make the follow-up list.
Now is it
Very
on
well
the
done.
follow-up
Now
list?
it will be on the follow-up list, that's for sure.
What about,
That's the
what
one
about
with the
technical equipment?
computers.
There is a cost for technical equipment. The minutes from the last meeting say that this would come out of the senior high budget. Now, Mr. McElhaney and Mr. Cronauer have had some conversations about what exactly that means, because the year that it should have been approved was a year we didn't spend all the senior high budget, but we explained that that doesn't work that way, that the budget is the budget and that money moves to fund balance money. So they're going to work out what they can and put in what they can through their budget unless, and now you have a quote, or you did have a quote from before.
Got
Is a
several
quote?
quotes from different folks, yeah, to help figure out what that looks like, from local spot here.
Well, go ahead and put it on the Building and Grounds Committee
What's the
with
number?
both quotes.
Or what's the range?
You
I think it was
You're not
between
gonna have
15
a
and
quote
20,000.
for remodeling now, that's the trouble.
Well, they're getting one.
It was, my memory was right around 20,000 if we did it the right way, but I don't know if that quote's still valid, but.
Yeah, probably not.
Are the quotes you're getting, is that for the remodeling and the equipment?
No,
Or
that's-
just,
To my
See-
knowledge, that was equipment, but that
that's,
most likely is not
That's the hangup.
accurate now.
Well, I thought you met with Cheney and he maybe is.
Well,
getting-
that's for the building part, the
Right.
actual equipment.
That's just
part
for the-
is-
We won't,
Yeah.
we won't have a number for next week.
No, but we can, but at least I'll put it on the Building and
Yeah.
Grounds agenda. We'll have a quote for that, and then we can talk about what we're really looking at.
Right.
Can you get a quote for the equipment again, an
Yeah.
updated quote, and then we'll pair that with Cheney's quote?
It should be less.
Didn't you say, Mr. O'Leary,
Yeah.
that Cheney had someone there to look at it? An
Yeah.
HVAC person or?
To my knowledge, yeah, Wade had a gentleman come in with Wade, or with Cheney, and they looked at the space and they went through, I think they're working on a quote to
Yeah.
see what that would be.
We might be able to have.
Where
both
is this,
quotes.
where is this storage room?
So, if you're familiar with,
behind the.
banner there that's behind the chalkboard, that room that's behind there's a space that's probably maybe a third the size of this room, that the current music library and all repair spot is at right now.
So I'll just make a note that we are going to put this on the Buildings and Grounds, at least that portion on the Buildings and Grounds Committee.
I'm a little puzzled because it's unusual for us to have a room that doesn't have air. Okay, it's not possible, that we didn't, that this would have been,
There are different air requirements for storage rooms or as opposed to rooms that are
Yes,
going to
but
be
it's-
occupied by students?
yes, but again,
And
it's,
storage.
it should be a
equipment?
question of opening and closing some ductwork. It shouldn't be a question of whether, of no air.
Mm.
And you're only talking about a handful of students at a time.
And the
What,
equipment,
4 or 5?
I mean, this-
You're
it was like-
not gonna have 30 in there.
No, I think it was like a dozen we were looking at. To speak to that, if it matters, I know before, years ago, that space between that room and the local music room used to be in just one giant room. And that's now part scene shop and that other part. It used to be a massive storage area between there years and years ago. If you go there now, it's funny, some of the like the switches will turn lights off in that
That might
space.
explain it.
It's all kind of, yeah.
There may have been venting in the,
It
The big
was at
room.
one point, I think, a massive room, and now it's.
when they put a wall or whatever.
Okay, yeah, I again, but I wouldn't expect this to be, I expect this to be a ductwork problem,
Right.
not a machine problem.
I think that sounds right. But I will, I'll put it on Cheney and his team will get some specifics on what exactly needs to take place to make the space
Yeah.
usable.
A floor plan would be really useful, so that we could imagine, so we don't picture this.
And send it to the board as soon as the quotes come in. So we can see them ahead of the meeting.
So if you convert this room from a storage to people, what are you gonna do with the storage?
I was talking to my colleague earlier today about making one what's considered the orchestra office, basically making that the music library, like an actual music library. It would be moving all that stuff into the shelving that's there now.
And then where would orchestra office could go.
So those instruments could actually then go into the lockers that we have that would be behind locks, not just sitting on shelves, it'd be in the locked storage room.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a little sensitive because we had this discussion a decade and a half ago about storing equipment. And the band storage room was pain at the time. A lot of space went to the band storage. Okay, a plan would be useful so we can picture what they're talking about.
Yes, sir. Okay. Ready for number 3 then? Okay. This is another opportunity that we just wanted to bring to the board's attention because I have to sign an agreement basically, and the law says that the board has to approve anything that I sign. So we have been working with Aaron Intermediate Unit to provide all of our senior high school students with a certification in teen mental health first aid. And what this training is to recognize the warning signs in not only yourself, but in your friends. If you see someone that might be presenting crisis, you can recognize that and then know how to connect them to services. So, it takes a village, to take care of people. It's that approach. We had several of our teachers trained as trainers in this, and we've integrated it into our health curriculum, specifically in 10th grade. This year, we're providing it to 10th, 11th, and 12th grade so we don't miss that group of kids. So everybody 10, 11, and 12 will get it. Moving forward, it'll happen in the 10th grade health class. Aaron IU has done some work with the state to make this an industry recognized credential, which means that it's whenever we're rated on our Future Ready Index, they look at our curriculum, they look at what we do to make students college and career ready. This is another feather in their cap, another check mark for us that says, yes, your students are graduating with an industry recognized credential, which is a good thing. I just need your approval to sign the paperwork to make this an industry recognized credential for our students. So this should be, I think this is a no-brainer, but I do have to get your approval for this. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have about teen mental health first aid or industry recognized credentials.
She says it's fine.
All right. That's and I'm good. I think it's a good thing. I think it's something that, it's something that if we're doing the work, we may as well get the accolade for it. So why not? Okay, that brings us that's all the agenda items that we have, sir. We are now down to non-agenda items. And I am going to share my screen here because this past week, we were invited by PDE, by Patan, to present at the PBIS and MTSS Facilitators Forum in Hershey, which was an honor for us. Dr. Rory was there. I went and sat in on a session, did a very nice job, and I learned a lot. But this was a conference from schools from all over the state, universities from all over the state that get together and they talk about best practices, K-12, when you're looking at school-wide positive behavior and MTSS practices. And we were invited to present because the work that we're doing at the junior high school, specifically Dr. Minnick, Mr. Bowers, Dr. McMasters, Mr. Zahorchak, building this system of supports is fast becoming a state model. There's not a whole lot of schools doing what we're doing to the level that we're doing it, which is exciting, and it's good to know. And we thought it'd be a nice opportunity to take what we shared with some of the state and share it with you all here as well. So if you just give me 1 minute, I will bring up the presentation, but I'll turn it over to Dr. Minnick or Justin if you guys want to say anything, start anything.
Well, Donnie and I, not to speak for Justin, but Donnie and I just kind of wanted to give Angela her props. I mean, she's been instrumental, critical in helping not only coach up our teachers with some strategies that will help them and helping provide interventions. We've done a lot of the logistical work, creating what the teachers need in terms of instructionally meeting the needs of our students. Angela's done a lot with helping pick apart the data and identify student needs. She's just been incredible.
And just to add to that, the conference was phenomenal. Like, just actually seeing we were one of very few secondary schools in the state of Pennsylvania that are implementing this MTSS system. the turnover that we've done in 1 year in that building is phenomenal. If you walk through our halls, you just notice the difference in regards to the environment. The kids, it's a supportive environment. And it's truly an honor just to be a part of that process. As you know, we came to you guys with some schedule changes and some staffing needs and with the additional SRA materials and all the intervention materials that Anne's going to talk briefly about here. Just everything coming together and seeing it just benefit our kids is great. Our junior high is in really good shape right now, and we couldn't have done everything without Ange. She's our MTSS coordinator. She's taken on that role. The data meetings we have, she's also involved in our PBIS, which we rebranded entirely. It's just everything's up and running. There are bumps with the wheel. There are going to be bumps in the road along the way. But that's how we learn, and that's how we get better. So everything's up and running now. Our students are reaping those benefits from what our staff is doing. And Ange's going to share a little more about that in the presentation she gave.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too that we're by no means declaring victory here. Like we're on step 3 of like a 75-step process, but we're a lot further along than a lot of other school districts in the state, and I think that's something that we should be proud of and we should reflect on. Did everybody see that? And light turned up.
Want the light down?
Light down would be better.
Light down better, please. There, is that better?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes, thank you.
Can you make it full screen?
I don't know if I can make it full
Well, you
screen.
can at least get rid of some of the visitors on the side.
I could probably hide the visitors on the side.
Well,
Ooh, that's-
you can at least go down to one column.
There we go.
Phone. And what do you think? This one?
Spotlight.
Spotlight? Look at that.
Thank you.
It can be done.
So I would also add that I've had to be reminded that we are only in November of like a massive overhaul. And we had done a lot of having conversations with our teachers and planning last year. And then over the summer, the teachers put in a lot of work. So getting it off the ground is like they say, like when you're in motion, but then you have to take the motion to action, which can feel really uncomfortable sometimes, but we did it. And I think we do have some really promising things to share, as well as a rundown as to kind of how we've structured things at the junior high.
Oops, I skipped 2. Hold on.
Nope, oh, you did.
I did.
Yes, you did.
There you go.
All right, so we know the need for secondary MTSS comes from multiple channels and a lot of different research that we know about students as they transition to the junior high and high school level. So looking at growth versus achievement results, trends, and looking at, are there trends that would suggest we need to do something different with tier 1 to ensure that when students come into us in 6th grade, we have a roadmap for what they need leaving us in 8th grade to head to the 9th grade successfully. We also know that word reading difficulties cause global impact, but those tend to be less assessed at the secondary level because the assumption is that most students are proficient readers. And we also know that students who struggle with literacy in particular are at increased risk for poor attendance, behavior problems, continued decline in academic achievement, and then also they may exhibit mental health needs associated with anxiety and things like that.
Yeah, and if you look at when we looked at the data over the last few years, 2019, we were doing okay in a lot of areas in ELA at the junior high. ELA was probably our strongest, specifically the junior high. It was one of our strongest departments and our strongest areas. We had a bunch of retirements, we had COVID, and the trend went completely the other way. The growth just isn't there. The achievement is not as good as it was, but achievement's still not terrible. But the growth is definitely trending the wrong direction, which just screams for the need for all this.
What number is the achievement?
Achievement? I don't know the exact number. I can look it up for you, but
Well, I'll
it's
explain that, the PFAS overview stuff coming up just real briefly, the quintiles, and because this was helpful for me in understanding like where are we truly at as a district
yeah,
with achievement. It's difficult to summarize with one number.
Oh,
The
come
junior high, I know.
yeah.
3.
I feel like I'm dreaming the numbers sometimes.
Okay.
I mean, Dr. Bennett, do you know off the top of your head, like, is it?
It's okay.
It's some. Yeah, I'll
It's
find it for you.
coming up.
Yeah.
I can wait.
So, and this can you hyperlink the presentation for later for anyone that wants to be able to view it after, because I know this is really tiny. So basically we've modeled everything after the state's framework for secondary MTSS in Pennsylvania. And for the most part, it's very similar to the elementary. The biggest difference is that you're really looking at an early warning system. So not just one indicator that a student might be struggling, but you're also looking at attendance, office discipline referrals, academic achievement. So you're kind of looking more broadly because there can be multiple reasons why a student might be struggling. Also, there is less of like a tier 1, 2, 3 delineation, and you really focus a lot on the evidence-based practices in the core, with then some more diagnostic type assessments as you get into the more advanced tiers. So all of this encompasses core instruction, screening, so you're looking at all of the students, but you're doing it in a way that is a little more strategic, I don't want to say strategic, but like, for example, you don't have to give an oral reading fluency assessment to all kids, because if you know that they're proficient and have that minimal level of proficiency based on multiple data points, then there's no sense in digging deeper for those students. But if there's a red flag, that's kind of, it's more of like a gated procedure to funnel students into the right targeted instruction. As Mr. Bowers mentioned, we're doing a lot with teaming, database decision-making. We have our core MTSS team up and running. And I do believe that we have a lot of shared ownership. We worked together with the junior high to establish a shared vision for what we want. And we ran it through a process of, everyone in the building came together. We listed all the possible difficulties that we're seeing. What are some possible solutions? And really what evolved from that conversation is that we all wanted the same things. And so I felt like that helped the building embrace the changes in ELA, because the schedule was like, it was a ripple effect. So it was going to be felt by all. And so we kind of just needed to prepare everyone for what that was going to be like. So, yeah. So you'll see this a couple times referenced as we go through how these pieces kind of come together. All right. So to look at the health of Tier 1 core, we looked at PVOS, which is basically not just looking at one particular PSSA score. Mr. Heinrich,
Real quick,
please.
Tier 1 core is the instruction that every student gets, no matter what, right? Tier 1 is in the classroom, the English curriculum for 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Cool.
Mhm.
Just to make sure, I know we don't sometimes we speak in code.
No, that's okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And also, as we talk about this, everyone receives core. So there's not you're getting fewer vocabulary words because you struggle with reading. What we're doing is providing supports through assistive technology, through oral language, through rich conversations and discussions, and small group instruction. So if students are struggling, we're giving them access to the text. So if Dr. Minnick struggles with reading, but really wants to read Harry Potter, we're going to give him access through an audiobook. And so he can still partake in the conversations or be a part of the Harry Potter club that they have during club days. So just wanted to highlight that. So when it comes to looking at trends in growth and achievement over time and across grade levels, we don't want to just look at one score really ever. And so we know that PSSAs give us one window of time for a student on that particular day. Still relevant, but also have to consider those other variables. And then link it as our benchmark assessment. So PVOS is listed first because something that I like about PVOS, which statistics was not always my strong suit, Dr. Romeo being honest. But I will say that the PVOS system, it measures the growth of students through grade levels and over time. So it compares the student's most recent assessment with their prior assessment history. And we know that there can be multiple variables that can come into play there, but it is one of the better ways to look at your overall system, not your individual students per se.
Absolutely. So this is growth. This is what we look at for achievement. This system brings in a benchmark that is predictive of how well they will achieve, so that we can make sure that they're progressing toward that achievement as we move through it. Plus, the system will bring in all kinds of other data points that we'll talk about in a minute.
All right, so this is the part I just need you to stick with me.
Yeah.
Okay, so this, whenever you're looking at PVOS and you see this, Indiana Area School District is an 80-20 district, grades 6 to 8. So what does that mean? So I have spent a lot of time digging into understanding PVOS with our state MTSS lead. And essentially what that means is when you look at a group of students that are spread out, so let's say this is 7th grade, and they're spread out across 5 quintiles. So you have your, in the lowest quintile are students in the 1st to 20th percentile. And generally those students are achieving 1.5 or more years below grade level. So you could have students achieving 3 or 4 grade levels below, but a minimum of 1.5 or lower. Then quintile 2 is 21st to 40th percentile. We know that if students hit at least a minimum level of proficiency at the 40th percentile, they should leave us successful in the future. So when you're looking at where our students are spread across the quintiles, what is the middle score? So you take your total population, you find your median, and if your median, whatever quintile it's in, so for this particular group, the quintile fell it was in the 4th quintile actually. For the most part, we have in the different grade levels, students falling at least at the 3rd quintile and above. So what that means is we are an 80-20 district. So 80% of our students are hitting at least a 40th percentile performance compared to the state.
So here's the way I like to think of it, because she said a lot of big words.
I know, I'm sorry. I can't.
So
It's hard to explain.
if you took all the students, right, in our district and you spread them out on this line, the majority of them would be standing on this side of this chart, right? 80% of our students fall in this area. In the top 20% of the scores in the state, the next 20% scores in the state, and the middle 20% scores of the state. We have many fewer students over on this side, but there's still a good number. About 20% of our students are standing over here. So, and this chart is complex. This chart is actually a growth chart. If we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, our students should grow at least 1 year from the time they go into a class to the time they come out. That's this green line. Anything above that green line is added value growth, right? Where the program and the teacher have really done a great job in actually growing them more than a year. This example, and this is not, again, we're not trying to say, hey, we won. This is just an example of some of the data we use. This grade level of teachers are putting the top performers, our most gifted students, are growing about 1 year. You know, the next group, middle group, and lowest or second lowest group are really growing above and beyond. And then we have some work to do with our lowest achieving students, if that makes sense. So this chart takes achievement and balances out and then shows how much we're growing each subgroup of kids. Point being is that we're really getting detailed on how we're looking at these students, how they're growing, what they're achieving, what we can do about it, if that makes sense. So, and 80% of our students possessing a minimal level of proficiency is good. That means that we're in a good spot where we actually can have the capacity to focus on that 20% that are really, really in need, if that makes sense.
It does. And then essentially setting the bar at 90% of, like, making us a 90-10 district, where at least for the lowest 2 quintiles, we want to shift them just in the growth standard. So it doesn't mean that you go from below basic to proficient. It means maybe you go from a low below basic to right on the cusp of basic. So it's really looking at the growth that the students are making and not just shifting a category in their achievement. So just like Mr. Heinrich said, we want there to be at least the 1 year of growth on the green line for quintiles 3 and above, but we really want quintiles 1 and 2 to be well above the line, as far above the line as we can. And we know that takes a lot more effort, energy,
Right.
all the things.
Because they have the biggest gap to close. So in order for them to close that gap, we can't only be growing a year, we need to be growing a year plus, if that makes sense.
So my question, Ange and Rob, is 80% possess a minimal proficiency in ELA 40th percentile or higher. Does that mean that 60% of the population in Pennsylvania has a higher level in ELA than what? Help me understand what this 40% actually.
So these quintiles are all of the students in the state. So the highest 20% of achievers in the state, we have X amount of them, right? We have Y amount of the next quintile, you know, et cetera, et
Okay.
cetera. most of our students fall into these three. 80% of our students fall into this. The median child falls somewhere in this fourth quintile, which is good, which means we're doing above average.
Correct. Can I add one thing, because I think this might help explain a little bit. So it's looking at percentile ranks. So you think about like any normed assessment measure and you have the normal curve and you have percentile ranks ranging from 1 to 99. So basically that says if you're looking at every student that has participated in the PSSA assessments and they're pulling all of that data to say, now when we rank order you from here to here, and then compute the percentile ranks, where do you fall? So when it's saying 40th, it's looking at all the state data and saying 40th percentile, looking at all the students. So if there's 100 people in this room, at or above, at least like you're the top 60 within that room, meaning that there's going to be 40 students below that you want to be keeping an eye on and improving upon. Dr. Ron, do you mind making sense? I always turn to him because he's like a statistical guru. If I can put
It's all
you on
about
the
making
spot.
does everybody else understand it? Because we're talking
I know.
sophisticated stuff. Yeah, you are. So generally you want the purple bars to be high going upward, not downward, generally speaking. And so the one that's going downward, that means we got some work to do. Those also happen to be our lowest performing students overall. So they're actually not growing as rapidly as everybody else. Great work in all the other categories, essentially. And also, to be crystal clear, this is not an indictment of teachers. To be crystal clear, this is a systems issue, not a teacher issue. It's not a classroom teacher. We're not pointing fingers at teachers. It's all about building systems that are stronger and better.
100%. That's well said.
So, Tim, I guess my question really is being at the 40th percentile and above a good thing?
Yes, it is.
Or do we really need to be at the 60th percentile and above?
40th percentile generally is regarded as a minimum threshold of proficiency. So if you're at the 40th percentile, then it means you're probably going to be a sufficient reader, writer, and mathematician as an adult. You want to be okay.
Okay.
Anything above that is better, is gravy. You're a little bit below 40th percentile, that's like, we're a little bit concerned. If you're at the first percentile, we're very concerned. Because that means you don't have the basic academic skills to function in most kinds of jobs.
Okay. That helps, yep.
And again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds on the data, but
You've said several times this, talking about Indiana and looking at the whole state, that Indiana's over on the right. What is that chart? That
So
chart
that's-
is
so
our
this is
school
Indiana.
only?
Well, so basically what I did is I screenshotted to give you the visual of the quintiles to explain what we're looking at from a systems purview
Mhm.
across all the grade levels. So this chart does not provide a summary of 6 to 8 because it's broken down in the system in a very wonky kind of way.
But it's Indiana,
Yes.
it's not the state.
yeah, this is an Indiana chart.
So
This is,
comparing to the state
it's
achievement group.
yeah. It's a little bit of both. The quintiles are determined by state data. So the groupings are made by state data, but this chart is specifically Indiana 7th grade or something. So it's in ELA. So this is how our students did last year in our ELA courses in whatever grade this is. And again, this is not, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole of the data interpretation. I just want to let you know, what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then we can, dig into the data later if you'd like.
Because I think for us, at the time, it was like how many alarm bells are we having going off? Like, are we critically ill or are we a little bit ill? Like, so that's looking in a pretty nice triangle, I guess, that we don't have a totally overwhelmed system, I guess, for
Yeah.
tier 1.
But in tier 1, I apologize for simplifying this,
No, you're not.
but if we have 200 kids in 6th grade, this chart's telling us that 40 of them aren't performing.
40 of them would be below the minimal threshold, which is why all these changes are going to help.
And that's why we have the intervention tiers that we developed.
That's what
with-
we're-
yes, That's why we're doing what we're doing.
Now, we're not gonna lose the success of the other
No.
160 kids. We're gonna pick these other kids up by the bootstraps.
Correct.
Correct.
Correct, and see how that second purple bar is really tall?
Yeah.
That would suggest that those kids on the bubble are actually growing a lot faster than their peers across the state, so they really shouldn't backslide.
Yeah.
If anything, they're probably gonna be moving over further to the right.
Yeah,
as time progresses.
the comparison to the state averages are academically interesting, but relatively useless. I'm interested in the 40 kids. Okay, and that's where we need to focus
Yep.
on
We've
the
spent
40
the
kids.
majority of last year and this summer, and so this year focusing on those tiered interventions that we have. And that's why we, the scheduling changes, the intervention materials. So that's been our main focus, along with trying to increase our tier one. And I think now that we have these intervention classes developed and the data, we're looking at constantly to see if they're making growth. Now we're focusing on our tier one instruction for all our kids and keep all our students on that other side growing as well.
Keep
So
them
yeah,
backsliding.
Right. And-
Now, I assume that we've been doing this at the K through 3.
Yeah.
And so my concern on that is that there's a smooth handoff.
yes.
And is that happening?
So we're starting to see those kids come in now.
Yeah.
And what the hope is that last bar that you see there is going to be less, and our tiered interventions at the junior high are going to be less because of all those MTSS interventions.
We'll have less than 40 kids per class. Okay, you may only have 23.
Correct, but we still have a system in place to identify those students that need those interventions and support them along the way.
So, yeah, not to belittle, not to beat on this, but when my kids went through the handoff from the elementary to junior high to the high school was non-existent. And especially the high school, trying to get advice on classes. It was like the records were in a box somewhere. And so I just want to make sure that we act as a single district. But you're getting kids now that have come through 3 and 4 years of this from Ben Franklin, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
And so whenever we were looking at recommendations for instructional groupings, we were pulling in information from previous years to help support, and essentially, well, probably not as efficient as I would want it to be, I looked at every single student's profile and was like, okay, based on these data points, what is this particular child's need? And something that I want to emphasize, as I said already, everyone gets core. It's not ability grouping, but it is definitely targeted skill instruction, because that was something with an evidence-based program. And I think that's something I was passionate about, was because I didn't want to widen the gap to say like, well, you get to learn all of this cool information, but you are a struggling reader, so you're not going to learn as much because you're not going to be exposed to as much.
I'm not going to be expected to do it.
But yet you're still going to go on to the next grade level and be expected to digest
Just
grade
watching, yeah,
level,
yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
grade level content. So,
Yeah, and again, I want to go back to this thing because we actually had a conversation about how this might actually want to take us down rabbit holes. Like, we're not trying to show you data to say, look how great we've done, or look, we don't really have a lot of data yet to say that what we're doing is really working. We have a little bit of progress monitoring data and with some specific kids, but our next benchmark doesn't even happen until January.
But-
So what we're sharing is
But you
just,
do have data from the elementary schools.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And specifically Ben Franklin.
and
And these
and-
spikes move on.
so we had coming into sixth grade, Horace Mann and Eisenhower data. that we
Okay,
pulled in.
so you've had data on some of these kids, what, 3 or 4 years?
Long time.
now?
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's not like we don't have any data.
correct.
Okay, we don't have a lot of data on the junior high level, but the kids coming in are well documented.
And
for sure.
surprisingly, I found a lot of data on our existing students and have found good ways for our team to use it. So we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, and really what this presentation was about was how we're building this system. You know, we have the screeners now where we didn't have the screeners before. We have data-based decision-making happening now, which we didn't necessarily have before. You know, we're building the system is really the purpose of this review. It's just an update.
Yeah.
And we'll bring you more data when we have
But you're building a system based on what you were doing.
what we've already
Right.
done.
K through
And it
12.
looks a little bit different at the secondary level, which is why I wanted to share, like, how do we look at the tier one core? And really, and these kind of evolved through data discussions for all students. So then, like, kind of looking at this, but also being able to drill down into standards, skills, topics between the Lincoln and the PSSA assessments, we realized that we need continuity from, like I said, where kids come into us at the beginning of sixth grade, then what do they need to know to enter seventh grade successfully? Then what do they need to know to enter eighth grade successfully? And then from there to enter into the high school prepared for all the things. So that is one of the pieces of information we learned about tier one. We also recognized that vocabulary and writing for all students was really important. So everyone has Step Up to Writing, which is something that can be used to write across any kind of content that the students are engaged in or literature. We recognize differentiated instruction to meet the variety of learner needs. So even though the groups are skill-based and are targeting specific skills, each student still brings their own unique learning strengths and needs. So we might have students who are off task. We might have students who need to have a couple more check-ins. We might have students that need a couple additional explanations, but they're really where they need to be based on the information that we have about them. And then lastly is increasing the use of academic engagement strategies and cooperative learning opportunities and things like that. And all of this is evolving through our collaboration with the teachers and with the intermediate unit and our patent consultant to really support the teachers as they're implementing, because this was a change, and I will say they embraced it and they dove right in and they've been incredible. So
Agreed.
bless you.
Agreed.
So when you're thinking about all of what we just talked about for tier 1 and the health of the core, how do we know what other students might need to ensure that minimal level of proficiency when they go forward? And so if the student was not proficient or advanced on, and it wasn't just the PSSAs, because you can look at PBOS predicted percentile rank. You can also look at their most recent PSSA. You can look at their Linked assessment. So multiple layers of data. So if the student was not falling in a range that would suggest like, hey, they've got this, they're ready to continue to roll, we would have to decide if it was a word reading problem or was it more of a comprehension and vocabulary problem. So this is where that gated procedure kind of comes through the down the pike, where we're casting that broader net, but then really making sure we're not missing anyone. So we gave the Maze assessment, and if students, and that's just like a quick comprehension check, and it is definitely not as deep as the PSSAs. It is kind of like reading a passage silently and circling the word that makes the most sense as you go. So are you attending enough, and do you have enough ability to self-monitor as you go? If that was below benchmark, then the students were flagged for an individual oral reading fluency assessment. If the oral reading fluency, which is that minimal level of your rate while you're reading and your accuracy, if they hit what is expected to free up that cognitive desk space for understanding, that but yet still showed us that they had a below average Maze, they had poor vocabulary performance, they had below benchmark or below standard on the PSSAs, then they would receive intervention that focused on building their comprehension and vocabulary skills. Core plus a really heavy focus on making sure that they were building those other skills. If the oral reading fluency was below benchmark, then we were looking at what level of word reading difficulty is the student having. And so we might just need a little bit extra, or we might need a lot extra. So that's where we would look at giving some diagnostic assessments, not to all, but really to those with the most significant needs, which ended up being about 10 to 15 students per grade level. So where is the student at, and how intense do we need to be with the intervention? Which I would say most of the students ended up participating in our rewards program, which is really focused on that, and we'll get there, but the multisyllabic word reading, breaking larger words apart, and things like that. So everyone is caught, whether they are proficient advanced reader, if they have language comprehension difficulties, if they have word reading difficulties, but are strong language comprehenders, or if they need both. So we catch them all. And no one lives in any particular space, so you'll see some of the progress monitoring later. Do you want to speak to the schedule? You've already kind of covered that, I think, before, right? As far as the schedule and how much time. Yeah.
So, and just to reiterate what we came to you guys about changing our schedule, having that block period for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade ELA courses for students that were in those 3 tiers that Angela was just describing, and butting up that win period for our lowest tiered students that really need that like solid intervention, extensive intervention. And just talking a little bit about the assessment process, that is no small undertaking. We've used several resources that you guys have provided us with the interns, and working with our ELA department, using all the resources that we're able to bring in to help with our system. And it's been phenomenal just to see that come together and pull the students out and do these assessments and really dive down deep into what our students need. I've never seen anything like it. in my time in education, and it's quite the undertaking, and it's very, very impressive.
And I would add to that, connecting with the kids has been really
Yes.
cool for me because I've had classroom conversations with students, but then the individuals. So I agree. It's all so you're all aware of like how the schedule shifted and all of the changes. So with that comes these different layers of support that are a part of each of those, and then the progress monitoring. So rewards is the intervention that is complementary to students that are they aren't quite as automatic as they need to be, and they're still working on their accuracy while reading. And so it's going to work on building their academic vocabulary skills and the word attack, basically.
And I do want to mention that this is the comprehensive grant that Justin wrote last year with, for Patan is what's been funding a lot of these things. You've seen these come across the board agendas to buy rewards, to buy this, step up to writing and buy these different interventions and the CKLA, pilot for the one group. This is all part of that comprehensive support that Patan's providing for us that is allowing us to build this system, so.
And just real quick to add, the 80-minute block that students have, this isn't delivered for that full 80 minutes. It is really designed to be like 30, sometimes it does take 40 minutes. The teachers have been gauging where they feel is the most natural break for students to continue on to the next section of instruction. So then the rest of it becomes the core time. All right, so students who are struggling with comprehension and vocabulary, we've really been focusing a lot on writing. We've used vocab search. A lot of our English teachers enjoy this instructional group because they are very much, they're much better than I think many of us in understanding, sentence structure, using syntax to derive meaning. And so they're really able to kind of hit that sentence structure that can help support reading comprehension. And then also the vocab search, which helps students, it gets into the deeper parts of words to help derive meaning. So you start to look at where words came from. So is it Greek? Is it Latin? So that they can help to draw meaning from the words. And then also check their understanding and context. So really getting students to be aware and self-monitor while they're reading.
So I think the thing that we're just talking about right now, all of these interventions are programs and interventions that have not happened previously. So kids who otherwise would not have received any interventions or support are now getting those additional supports. And I think Ange has highlighted a couple individual students just to show you. Like we were talking about earlier, I think with the benchmarks, I think we'll be able to show more whole group data as it goes. But as we look at some of these individual students, we're starting to see some things with individual students that it's like, wow, this is pretty impressive. And I think like I said, what stands out to me is, these students who otherwise would not have had any support before are getting those supports, and those supports are tailored to their needs, which I think is phenomenal.
Yeah, and you can see it working. I was walking around the classes the other day with the new principal, and we went into Brad Adams' class, which, by the way, Brad Adams is phenomenal. If you get a chance. And they're doing this experiment on, how endothermic versus exothermic heat. And I asked one of the kids, I said, what does that mean, exothermic? I don't understand that. And they were like, And they sat there and thought. And then I said, well, what does thermic mean? And they said, heat. And I'm like, okay. And then they figured it out through so they knew how to break down different parts of the word, which was really nice because it shows that it's working. I mean, the kids are able to derive meaning from words just by breaking down their parts. So, which is, a testament to this intervention here.
And something that we're using for progress monitoring, which I should have covered, and I can share more about this with rewards. So about every month, because technically these are our students that we want to keep a closer eye on, we're revisiting progress to see if they're making gains. And so students in this group, we do a maze and we do a writing curriculum-based measure. And I'll explain more of that later, but it kind of gives us a quick normative way to say, are they producing as much written work as we would expect? What is their correct writing sequence? Are they following the grammar, mechanics, syntax rules? With what accuracy? Because you might produce a lot, but you might not use punctuation or capitalization. And so that has been, those are the two tools that we're using. And then for students receiving the most intensive intervention, and something I want to highlight is that students have access to any of the layers of enhanced core, regardless of IEP status. So if a student has an IEP and they land in, needing rewards with that instructional layer, that's where they're at. And that was something that was a bit of an adjustment, I think, for example, like our special education team. It was like, wait a minute, how am I making sure that I'm supporting these other things? But we've worked through that, I think, really well as a team, and they have built in, time with Flex and Win and things like that where they can help support their students. So for our most intense students, these, I feel it's more about the instructional intensity. The program, yes, is important, but, and we're using SRA corrective reading for the word reading deficits, but there's the increased instructional time, because they have 120 minutes. There's an increase in opportunities to respond and receive immediate corrective feedback. So rather than make the same mistake a bunch of times, they get to correct it immediately. There's a reduced student to teacher or student to adult ratio because we do have a paraprofessional supporting, and they receive explicit systematic instruction. So the teachers delivering the most intensive have really worked with their team of other professionals to decide what is the best way to structure this so that I'm hitting core, that they have sufficient time for the word reading intervention, and that we're extending their learning with the paraprofessional, whether it's through writing exercises or additional practice. And so the way that one team has decided to work it might be slightly different than the way another team works it, but they've also learned to gauge their students and what their needs are. So sometimes that involves a couple of brain breaks where, they're doing more turn and talks and collaborative of learning and things like that. But that's what's happening in our most intensive. And the explicit instruction down there is that, and you don't have to go backward, but just when we talk about explicit instruction, it's not just I do, it's a lot of practice opportunities together and then a lot of individual practice because the students need a lot more repetition. So this list that's coming up, these are all of our actions since August, and I'm sure that we're probably missing some things. We have done a lot of teacher training, whether it has been through Patton or other training opportunities that Donnie and Mike have coordinated through the programs that we're using. Everyone's given their beginning of the year universal screening, so everyone has had a chance to dive into their own data and say, what skills do most of my students have and what skills do I need to reinforce with my students? We've done all of the baseline and program placement assessments because if you're in rewards, there's 2 levels of rewards. There's intermediate and secondary. So there's a minimum threshold for entry into those programs. So it was kind of like, where are students at and which one should we use? So those were done. I participated in classroom and student meetings, which has been really awesome for me because now I have students stopping me in the hallway and they'll say, did you check my grades? Have you seen my progress? Do you want to see what I wrote? And I love that. Because I just feel like clearly just getting that feedback loop going for them. And Ms. Cassidy, I would love for her to showcase sometime the journals that she has students doing because she's engaging them in self-reflection and self-assessment, but then extending it beyond to like, what is my why and why am I here and why is this important? So that's been really cool. The other things, coaching and lesson modeling, I will say in a secondary setting, some of that direct explicit instruction feels funny. And you wonder like, how are the kids going to receive this? And I was going around to all of my teachers during awards and like, does anyone need help getting off the ground? Like, do you want me to come in and explain it to the students and model it so that you can see? And one teacher's like, I'm already in it and they love it. And I'm shocked. Like I have to tell them to tone down their enthusiasm sometimes. But the teachers have really found fun, engaging ways. And another teacher has students finding words that they have to break apart into meaningful parts, and they're bringing them back when they find them in the class, into the classroom to share. So a lot of cool ways that kids are becoming more aware, I guess, too, of the words in their world. We've been doing progress monitoring of the skill groups where I've been collaborating with the teachers because I really feel like it's important for them to be in the classroom instructing. So I coordinate with them when I can help support that progress monitoring so that they can stay with their students and keep moving. And I already mentioned the core team meetings. Our collaboration with Patton and our IU consultants locally are amazing. And then I've had some just individual data reviews with teachers. So they'll say, could you just help me understand my classroom data? Or could you show me how this aligns with some of this other information I'm collecting as a classroom teacher? So it's been a really nice opportunity for me to be able to feel like I can connect with teachers and with students. And so, I know it's not about me, but I'm just saying like that it makes me want to come to work even more every single day because it's just been really incredible. These are more qualitative observations that I have either heard from teachers or that I've noticed myself. Increased participation. We have a lot of teachers who are saying like I had students who they refused, they wouldn't read, they wouldn't participate, there were behavior problems, and now they're like volunteering and asking for a chance to read. So that confidence is improving, they're more engaged. Students are very interested in their progress and they like to get that feedback. So I've started taking my assessment sheet with me from the time before so that I can give them that feedback if they want it. Improvements in word reading, accuracy, and fluency, and then also an increase in written output, grammar, and mechanics. Anything else? And I know, Donnie, you mentioned seeing a difference in the climate.
Yeah, we actually have data for Swiss referrals from last year to this year, just with the implementation of
What kind of referral?
Swiss referrals are our discipline logs,
Thank you.
office referrals. So if a student gets in trouble, it goes into a system called Swiss, ends up with Mike and Donnie having to handle it. So there's been a significant decrease in the number of office referrals from last year to this year already, just with the implementation of the school-wide positive behavior. So, that's a data point that we have that we can actually say, hey, this seems to be on the right track. Again, not here to declare victory by any stretch of the imagination, but, there is some promising details coming out as far as climate is concerned.
All right, so I wanted to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Again, this is not data this is just an example of the data that we're looking at. But
Correct. And this is not saying that every child's profile looks this way, but I wanted to give a glimpse of if we've identified a student that could be at risk for something, what information are we going to be able to have? So this would be a student that's receiving support. They're a good reader, but they're struggling with understanding what text is telling them. And so this is basically just the progress monitoring for some of the information that and we have this on, like I said, all of the students so that we can come together and I could meet with a Gen Beer and say, hey, let's take a look at your students and who's doing really well and what do we need to adjust and support in those different ways. So looking at the maze, so this is from September to October. So September is pink, October is purple, blue, there's purple there, blue on mine. At any rate, the student has grown across the board in their maze assessment as well as on the writing curriculum-based measure. And we always say like, okay, it's growth, but is it statistically significant? I didn't even go that far to look at rate of improvement, for example, because we know that not only does growth have to be present, but it has to be at a rate that's going to close the gap. So, but this profile would suggest the student's moving in the right direction, and we need to get to the place where we're saying, is that growth enough to be where they need to be? And I will say that these assessments are done on grade level. So this is a student that's participating in the rewards program. And this is a student that also had pretty significant difficulties in early elementary school and had received a lot of intervention throughout the time. And now they're at the junior high. But there was significant growth in their oral reading fluency, which was a grade level assessment, as well as their accuracy. And then when it looks at multisyllabic word reading fluency, that really has to do with not only how many multisyllabic words they can read in a minute, but also how many word parts do they get accurate. And so the student really increased in not only their whole word reading, but also in the multisyllabic word part fluency and their accuracy, 100% accuracy on that last assessment. So, and that would align with their oral reading fluency accuracy as well. So again, not all profiles look this way, but this is just a glimpse of the kind of information that we have on students that we can provide that feedback loop for teachers and for students. And this is a student that is a current 6th grader, and they're receiving more of the intensive interventions. So and I will also say their progress monitoring is not on grade level, which the reason being is because we need to know curriculum-based measures are sensitive to small increments of change, but not if you're measuring them at grade level. So if you're looking at a 6th grade student that's struggling compared to 6th grade standards, but there's too big of a gap, it's harder to see that progress. So in this case, you can see their fluency is picking up, but then we had a dip in their accuracy. So we want to make sure we're emphasizing accuracy first and not just how many words they're reading.
And what Ange is talking through now is the example of what the conversations the teachers are having at these meetings where they're looking at the student data to really decide what to do next, which is important because that wasn't happening before.
But Ange,
Oops.
you questioned the accuracy,
Correct.
but it only dropped 1 point. Is that really statistically significant, or
So
is
it
that?
doesn't mean that it's statistically significant. It's kind of more of like a red flag. So if I was giving feedback to a student, I would say, hey, you really did a great job increasing your fluency while you're reading, but don't forget, we don't want to just be fast. We want to be accurate while we're reading. So it's kind of like more of a feedback loop, because you do see, you're never going to just have a straight pretty trend. I'd love it if we did, but you're going to see a lot of kind of ups and downs because there are other factors, like background knowledge. If students read a passage that they don't have an experience with or can't relate to, it's much harder for them to be successful on the passage. So we look at that too, because sometimes teachers will say like, that was a real hard passage for many of my students, kind of thing. So just depends on that too.
Tim, you
Probably
want,
just 1 or 2 word difference, because if you're looking at the middle bars or reading fluency, the student read, that's pretty far away from me. I think it was 90 words.
Mhm.
So there was a 1 or a 2 word difference. That's why, so the accuracy dipped by 1 or 2 more words incorrect out of 90, which is not terribly different than the September score.
yeah, okay. That was kind of my point, is it really a big deal that it dropped here, or is it?
It'd be a bigger deal if you saw that dropping over 3 or 4 or 5 consecutive months. But a dip, 2 data points is not a trend, you need 3.
Okay,
And so that's the other idea too, is that you're going to be looking at it over time so that they're at least maintaining growth, like in accuracy sense, but you don't want to see a downward trend, and making sure that we're making instructional decisions before we would, like, if we don't want to wait too long, I guess is where I'm at. So. All right, so this last slide. So I know that most of you were here whenever I started, this is the start of my 5th year. And this is Declan, I don't know if you remember him. And I just wanted to share with you the growth, and I know he's my convenient sample, but I felt like I have permission to share him since he's mine. So I wanted to just give a quick refresher of the then, and then I'd like to show you him now. And then I swear to God, I did not coach him at all. I honest to God, I know. Because like, so he has a thank you. I asked him what he would say to the school board and to Mr. Heinrich, and honest to goodness, what he says is completely unscripted, not practiced, but I want you all to hear it because
so the data is 100% reliable.
You'll see the data, but the thank you, I think, is what she's talking
Yeah.
about. When we first asked us at our panel discussion, the first question was, well, what started you on this journey? And if you all remember, Andrew saying, Mike, a video. And the video is this video, is a snippet of this video. Hopefully it's all turned up and it's gonna work. It's not gonna work, is it? You know what? This is where it would have been helpful to put on Randy's. I'll have to send it to you. I'll send it to you because it's worth a watch if you can. And I don't want to spoil for you because it'll do your heart good. But I definitely will send you the links because you need to watch it.
So you'll send the whole original video? Because
Well, I'll
some
send these-
people here on the board haven't seen it.
The 30
It was
seconds, 42
pretty-
seconds that you'll see,
It was
Great.
great.
Well, I can send all of it.
if you don't mind. Yes, because I wish I was hooked up so you guys could hear. Because you have to hear them read them. That's the whole point. But
Yeah.
But yeah, it is very nice. And when I watched it, it's one of those things that moves you a little bit to watch the growth that he's had over there.
And I
That's
think
so great.
even for me as a mom, this is the last thing I'll say, is how much as a parent in the community, I appreciate the investment and the leadership of the district, because Declan, yes, he's my convenient sample, but there are many, many, many more that I wish I could showcase. And it kind of gives me goosebumps just thinking about it, because I see their faces and it's not just him. And so when you take such a leap to invest in the students and the teachers and the programming and just all of it, there's not enough gratitude that I have, because I actually have so much of a better relationship with him. Because the other thing I want to add, when you watch the then and now, Once he started to get the programming, I completely stepped back because I needed my relationship back with him, and that was something that was suffering at home. So I can't thank you enough from a parent standpoint either.
So that's it. So we just wanted to bring to you an update of where we are in this journey. Again, we're just starting out, but just starting out and having this system built to this point is an example that the school or the state lead on MTSS came up to us after the presentation, congratulated us, thanked us for taking the time, and actually said, asked us if she could send people to come watch what we do. So, I mean, that says we're doing something right if
So
they're
you gave this same presentation?
a similar presentation. It wasn't exactly like this, but it was very similar. We sat on a panel and answered questions with another school district that was on this journey. Well, and there were only about 27 people in attendance, but 13 of them, I think, were like Patan tax because they wanted to see what we were doing. I think because I think it's fascinating to them because it's what they're striving to build in all these other schools, and they just haven't been able to do it yet. But because you guys said yes and because you believe in what we're doing, we have been able to do it. So.
And it's been like a team from like the top, like from everywhere. Like it's because even as Mike and Donnie were so humble about the work that they did and the school counselors to revamp the schedule the way that it had to be revamped. And it wasn't just like a rock, like a pebble in the pond. It was like a border in the pond. There might not have been any water left after, but it was like, so it was just so much better received. And I feel like it's because of the work that everyone did throughout the process. And it wasn't any one person. And it was something that everyone is invested in and sees it as being important for our students, so.
You're permitting us to have those two extra teachers. It's remarkable how much of a huge impact that made on our schedule and how much that this program, it started out, we were focusing on 6th grade and it extended into 8th grade. So, those two positions meant everything.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
And if we get it right, it should pay dividends up. It should pay dividends down the road. Where the problems that Wade and Doug will have to deal with, and their teams will be reduced. The lift should be a little bit lighter if we can correct it early on. So, I think we're on the right track. Hopefully, we'll see. And when we have actual data to share with you, we will bring it to you to say, hey, this is what we've seen from this. So.
I do have one question. I heard you several times say about the teaming.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you weren't teaming anymore at the junior high.
Oh, I'm sorry, not like grade level teaming or like teaming with like the content areas. No, it's more like MTSS, like we have our core team, but
Like
then
your
we
data
have like,
teams and
right,
okay.
exactly.
When did you stop the teaming?
Years ago.
Model stopped, at least 7 years ago, I think. I'm not sure exactly the year, but it's been a long time. We just,
Because why I'm asking this, in my head, it was when you said about 2019 was when things started going downhill. I just wondered if that was in any kind of correlation to when the teaming stopped, like when the team teaching stopped,
sure. Yeah.
did the data go down?
Yeah,
And
sure.
is that something we might want to rethink?
Well,
The teaming stopped probably in 2015.
That's about right.
Yeah,
It's around
and it really didn't stop, it kind of like faded out. And
Yeah.
I was on the board at the time, we were a little surprised that it happened, if I recall.
That it stopped?
Well,
Or that it started?
It seemed like it lost its advocacy, and so the teaming and some positions got cut, and it became more and more difficult, and then it just.
That's
stopped.
really what led to it.
The lack of position?
We lost several positions and we just couldn't sustain it, and then it just fizzled out.
Well, that's a shame, because I could really see this working well.
Oh,
Even better. It seems to be working well, but I could see it working even better if you still had the teaming in place.
So
Because
Sue,
when you have teachers talking about
Yeah,
the
that was-
students, they all have the same students, it can be really, really
I will say
impactful.
our core teams, because we have a MTSS core team that meets every 2 weeks, we have a PBIS core team that meets every 2 weeks, and we have a more, numbers are a little lower with our advanced tiers team that really looks at individual students. Just the participation by multiple departments, multiple staff members, increasing that buy-in to that teaming approach is having dividends in our building because more people in our building are involved in
So imagine if they all were.
that.
Yeah.
So Sue, I think the other thing that happened, looking at it from kind of a higher level, and granted, a lot of that was because of budget cuts and things like that. But I also think that when we went to the teaming, it was the first step to really go to a middle school concept rather than a junior high concept.
That's correct.
And the problem was, I don't know that our system as a whole essentially adapted or adopted the middle school concept as a philosophy or as a goal or as that bigger picture. This is how we're going to operate our system. And I think there was still that mindset that we're just going to run a junior high with a teaming program, and we didn't really buy into the middle school. Whereas I think if the middle school concept had been more universally adapted or accepted across the district, then it might have been easier to fight for those additional positions for the teaming, because now we're destroying essentially the middle school, which, as you know, is more student focused rather than curriculum focused. And you know, even today, you have junior high, JH, multi-level. We refer to it as the junior high, and even though it's more that classic 6, 7, and 8 middle school grade configuration. So I think if we want to go back to that teaming, as you said, I think a big part of that would be basically to have a campaign that says, okay, we're going to do this because we want a middle school, and we want our approach to be middle school in how this whole thing, of which the teaming is a critical part of it.
I think just to piggyback on what you said too, from a historical point, that there were positions lost, but it was also we were in the blue with ELA especially for a long time, and we had a phenomenal team, and in a very short amount of time, we lost the majority of our ELA team, and that really pulled back the curtain on the lack of interventions that we had. We didn't see the significant needs that we had from a systemic standpoint, because we were always sort of we were doing well in spite of those systemic gaps. And when we had to replace those teachers, there were gaps in what we could hand to them. This is the playbook we're going to run with, and that coupled with COVID, coupled with the change in our demographics.
2 teachers out on long-term leaves.
2 teachers, we had there was just this confluence of a number of things that really heightened not only the need to be responsive and to build the system, as Mr. Heinrich said, but demographically, a lot of things changed over the past 5 or 6 years.
Agreed. And I think losing those master teachers, those teachers have been teaching for 30 years.
Right.
They were very, very skilled. Not to say that our current teachers are not good teachers, but they were so good at what they did. When they left and we actually dug into what they were doing, we found that there was no real consistency, that there was a lot of, I think they were very, very good at teaching what they needed to teach without, like, the curriculum that was written isn't even written for the schedule that we have. So we have a lot of work to do on our end just to tighten it all up and make sure that the core is the same, so that we can guarantee the curriculum for all the students.
But not to put too rosy a picture on teaming and the success we had 5 or 6 years ago, we still were only achieving 80%, 85%. We still were graduating kids that did not have skills. We're on a search to try to patch this together and figure out how to save these 40 kids.
So Mike.
Sorry.
So Mike, and there's kind of a purpose to my question here. When you said it kind of pulled back the curtain and revealed certain things, and you were always in the blue, that triggered a thought on my part. Was this when the No Child Left Behind was very popular time frame?
That was before.
This was after the No Child Left Behind. Okay.
Yeah, the back end of it.
The, pardon?
The back end of it, for sure, yeah.
That was the first question.
Okay, because, you know, one of the things that when I was on the board during a part of that, and one of the things that I really struggled with was we would brag about, we always met the annual yearly progress and how great we were doing. And when I actually dug into the statistics, it was because that bar was so low compared to where we were, not doing anything, not making any changes, not trying to do anything different than what we were doing. You could fall asleep and fall off the log and still make annual yearly progress.
But that was kind of coupled with our shift in emphasis from achievement to growth too. That would kind of rode parallel with that, because those placards were always given for our performance from year to year. But we could project. We had a lot of work to do in order to maintain and sustain those recognition, because the bar kept rising.
And
I was in the classroom when they started putting those out, and
But what I found was that, that bar, the federal bar kept rising.
right.
But before it got to where we were, the whole thing kind of petered out, and we never faced the crisis that we were destined to face.
Right.
A couple other things, like,
Yep.
say, it's great to see the passion among all of you, and, we see it from K now through 8, so it's great. And it's also, I was sort of listening to see if I would hear the middle school students. My assumption is there's more of a chance for them to be like picked on and stuff if they are in the lower performing areas than maybe in the grade schools. And it doesn't sound like, it's almost like it's blind or whatever, that it's happening without that. If the issues are going down, then it's only a 1 year, numbers. So
I think that's fair to say. I think with and I'll let you jump in on that. I think because everybody is, virtually everybody is getting a double block. And that sort of camouflages the fact that within
that's
that block,
word,
it could look very different over here
Right.
compared to over here. And that's where a lot of the significant legwork went, where when I opened by just showing gratitude for Dr. McMaster's, her assistance with really breaking down the data and helping us determine where those kids need to go. That was huge.
at that grade level, especially.
Across 6, 7, and 8.
Yeah.
And each grade level has felt that impact.
And then my other thing, the group below the line, I'm guessing that your testing and such will pull out if since we have the university, and a lot of students from other countries, if there's a language barrier or problem, and then do we need more specific tailored help,
We've actually had a lot of conversation about our ELA students.
Yeah. ESL, yeah.
ESL students, yeah. So, like in particular, like where they would belong, what would best fit their needs, and that's what's nice about the system is you can actually hone in on individual students and make those educational decisions for them.
Right.
So if you have
You can
particular
tailor that.
situations like
Yeah.
that, yes.
And rewards is actually really good for students with English as a second language. And even within the different programs, it'll tell you which parameters are appropriate for a student. So for example, SRA wouldn't be appropriate if they don't have a strong command of the language. So you have to have the language part of it. So, and also working alongside Janelle, and she's just been incredible to work with as far as collaborating and supporting the ESOL population of students, so.
Tim,
I don't actually know the answer to this. Students for whom their English proficiency is not at a certain standard, do their PSSA and PBOS scores get factored into that? I would like to believe that they do not, because they take the PSSA, but their score doesn't count, right? So to your question, Mr. Kerr, I believe the kids for whom English is not their first language and they're not proficient in English, their scores aren't represented in there.
Okay.
Because that would be unfair. It'd be like any of us taking
Right.
a an academic assessment in another language for which you have no proficiency. So their scores don't count.
But we're still testing for that.
And we're still educating
Having
them, of course, yeah, but that's a whole different kind of approach for
Yeah.
students with English language needs.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Everybody.
Well, thank you guys for the presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm putting the links to the videos, so I will send that out. And hopefully I didn't miss anyone, but they are public, so if I did miss anyone, please feel free to pass it along.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you get a chance to watch the video, it does definitely make you feel good. Okay, up next, we have with us several representatives of the senior high social studies department who have been working at the board's direction to develop remediation steps for students who did not score at the rate of proficiency that we wanted to see on the Act 35 civics exam. And I'll make this big for everyone. So we have Matt Neal, Mike Burdig, and Bill Duty, accompanied by the Wade McElhaney.
Famous or infamous as the case may be.
That's right. That's it. So, and again, just to remind everybody, PA Act 35 is the state requirement that all students take a test on civic knowledge sometime between their 8th and 12th grade. And school districts have to report that proficiency to the state. Nothing happens with it. It just goes into a report. They haven't decided exactly what they're going to do with that data once they get it. But it is, if you remember, it was timely because we were noticing across the country a desperate need for civic education. It's something that we have been focusing on and we rewrote our curriculum to support a K-12. And so that is something that's very, very important. Although as far as the state is concerned, Act 35 just makes us report it. There's no penalty if we don't score a certain level. There's no reward if we do. In fact, if the students score 100%, they get a little attaboy from the state. But that's about it. So, so gentlemen, if you would, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, everyone. So, the next slide.
You just tell me why.
I'm going to start by reminding everyone, I spoke with you in August about the results from last year's test, and that then prompted your direction to develop a remediation program. So as I shared with you then, PDE has developed this three-pillar model of how they would like schools to approach civics education, consisting of a focus on knowledge, development of skills, and also on inspiring students to take civic action in their communities. And so in our senior high social studies department, we're trying to incorporate all three of these pillars into our programs across the 4 grade levels, but in particular, as you know, we've now moved government to the 11th grade, and so that is where this gets its highest focus. On the next slide, we have an overview, as Rob had already talked about, of why the Act 35 assessment is administered. School districts were given the choice when this law was passed to use either the National Citizenship Exam or a locally designed assessment. And at the board's direction, we designed a local assessment. And then, as I said, since we moved effective last school year, the government class to 11th grade, and that's the year in which we administered the assessment again. The state's requirement is that school district can give the assessment to as many grade levels as they wish. There are some schools that have given it to all of their students, but as many grade levels as they wish, but it has to be given at the conclusion of the course where we are addressing the civics and government standards. And so for us, that's the 11th grade course. And so it ended up that those students were taking a version of the exam for the second time. On the next slide, we have the results from last year. 199 students took the test, and 170 of them, or just over 85%, earned passing scores. And then on the slide after that is a comparison across the 3 years that we have done this. So in the first year, we were at about 90%, and the state has released results from the 2020-2021 school year, and it was 84% across the state. I do know that a sizable majority of schools use the citizenship exam. So we're in the minority as far as having a local assessment. So I think that our exam perhaps has a higher level of rigor than what some other schools are doing. But anyway, we beat the state average in that year, and they haven't released results yet for the other 2 years. So after our presentation in August, you directed us to begin the work of developing a remediation program for students who have not met proficiency on civics. And so my colleagues, Mike Burdick and Matt Neal, have spent some time working on this, and they'll share with you what they've developed so far.
Thank you, Mr. Dewey. Thank you all for having us. We appreciate it. Mr. Burdick and I worked on this a little bit here and wanted to share what we have with you all. This is the remediation program you requested that we developed. So if you look from that previous chart, we had students who were both labeled as basic or below basic on this test, which was in that case about 29 students. This would be targeting those students, and then there's a little, I believe there's a little sliver as well of, I reckon that with the bottom of proficient as well, or just basic and below basic.
For starters,
Just the basic and below
students
basic.
that did not meet.
Yes. So those students who did not make proficiency, we are targeting those 29 students for this remediation specifically. And that remediation program is an online format that provides some structured opportunities for reteaching and also reassessment. The goal here was for us to be able to let them do independent work during their 10th periods, and to be able to get that and build the program out locally so that it hits those core anchors that we're trying to hit. And then there would be a reassessment at the end of that program so that they would both practice and then take a full reassessment as well. The first part here is the reteaching. The lessons are going to be built around the PA civics anchors and eligible content. So that's all from PDE, and everything's going to be tied directly to those anchors. And those 2 modules are going to be specifically relating to government forms and functions and citizenship and modern democracy. So that's a module 1 and a module 2. And you'll get to see a little bit of what that looks like in the Google Classroom as we go forward here. But the lessons are going to use online resources and text and video that are tailored to each specific core standard. And then that is a picture of what the Google Classroom looks like at the top. So these students would be enrolled in this classroom, the ISD Civics Remediation 23-24, and that would be for those students that they would get that in their academic advising. This is just to give you a sense of what it would look like to a student so you see and can key in. And the topics, I can give you some of the topics here, but the goal here is to show you that each one of those things breaks out, right? So a student could, a student should work through them in order, but let's say they're struggling with one of them, they could move on to the next one and continue to key in on, say they want to learn about governments and government revenue and spending. Maybe they're struggling a little bit with domestic policy, they could move forward to influence on policymaking or foreign policy after that. But this is all the module 1. And then there's another module that would be the module 2. And these are the topics that correspond to those anchors. We wanted to give you just an example of what the reteaching would look like. And so the goal here is to take that anchor, which is analyze how power is transferred in various forms of government and the level of democracy indicated by the transfer of power in that government. And then we have specific resources for them pulled to be able to teach them about that transfer of power. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the reteaching example is that they will have one back, Mr. Hyman.
One back?
Yeah, sorry about that.
I got overzealous, I apologize.
No, it's okay. This part is for the transfer of power anchor that they gave us. So the students are going to read a brief article from the Bill of Rights Institute, and they're going to take that article explaining the expectation of the peaceful transfer of power in the US system. So they're gonna read the article's on the next slide. And it's a short excerpt article about that transfer of power, presidential power. After they read that, there's a little video clip we picked for them on the next slide. And this is,
Did I skip it again?
no, that's my fault. This is more on this. They're gonna view this video clip, and we have a video clip here from President George W. Bush in 2008, former President George W. Bush transferring power in his outreach to President-elect Barack Obama.
Oops.
So that short video, it's about 2:30, 2 minutes. Yeah, it's a 2-minute video. So it's something very digestible, keying in on exactly what the content that they need is. So they read about it, right? They got to see it and hear about it as well, and give an example, a real life example of, hey, this is how this happened with George W. Bush, with former President George W. Bush, and at the time President-elect Barack Obama. And in this clip, he talks about working with the incoming administration and trying to make things as smooth of a transition as possible.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
So if you have a student who is very limited in their reading ability, nobody wants to read government and history at that age anyhow, especially if they can't read.
Yeah.
Will they be able to be successful by watching the video? Do you have it so that
So that it
they can
translates.
get, if, because they're probably pretty good at going around and trying to get information in other ways other than reading?
Yes.
Do you think that it's possible for them to be
So
successful?
yes, and what I would say is, if Mr. Heinrich, if you go back a couple slides to go back to that article, that excerpt that we have there,
Mhm.
Mrs. Broad, if you look, it is pretty short.
So that's the whole thing?
Yeah, and there
And I
is,
can't even start to see the.
yes, of course, yeah.
I can't even start to see how difficult the vocabulary is.
Right, so
Sentence
there is a
structure.
reference to a larger article as well, but the goal here is, because it's so targeted, and it also has the video and the text, and each example is different, right? So there always isn't the best resources on everything in video and text. There are some ways that we could do that. We have Google Read and Write on the computers as well, so kids can have things read out loud to them on
Okay.
every Chromebook.
Okay,
And also, there are going to be academic advisors in those periods, and they can also talk to social studies teachers to get support as well. So each video, and the video and the text don't necessarily match every time, but they reinforce each other when we have them. Sometimes it will be just a video or just text, depending on what it is.
Yeah, Mrs. Stewart, Mrs. Manning do a great job working with our students with special needs in this area specifically. So that will be available during that 10th period too, checking with kids if needed.
Thank you, and
Sorry.
thank you for that question.
Before you go on, I'm gonna throw a log in this mess here. These kids have now taken our government test, our government class, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Why is 50% a remotely acceptable number to score on this test to be called proficient? I don't understand.
It was based on the Keystone model.
I don't care. I'm gonna,
Please.
if these kids are 11th graders and they've had our course and they're only scoring 50%, you have 135 kids in that next tier. Okay, and I don't know how many are at 50 or 60 or 70.
Yeah.
It just seems like a really low bar, or the test is not valid. Okay, I mean, there's two options here. Okay, but if the test is valid and we have 11th graders that are 2 weeks away from voting, and they're only scoring 50% after they have this information fresh. Okay, it strikes me as being that we're doing a whole lot of stuff right now that we should be doing in a classroom in order to make these kids more successful, or it's not a valid test. I mean, there's only two choices here. We either need to be doing better with our kids so that they can score a 95 or an 85 on this test and actually be proficient and be a useful citizen. A 50% on 50% as a citizen concerns me. And
Agreed, depending on the difficulty of the test. Agree with you 100%. Yes.
and that's what I don't know. If the test is too precise or too valid, or if it's and then you're only doing 29 kids when you should be doing maybe 135.
So Tom,
Mr. Harley, if I could, I'm sorry, if I could make something out of this law.
Please,
um,
please.
I think you alluded to it in as much as the rigor of the test. This citizenship test or this citizenship test is consistent with the design, setup, and rigor of Keystone exams. Mr. Heinrich alluded to it by saying those were the passing rates for the Keystone exams. That not only the multiple choice items, there's constructive response items that have been placed on this test. If it's something that the board wants to look at, the entire, we can certainly make that available to those students. But I would say the validity of tests is very good. The integrity of tests is sound. But if the board is saying, hey, look, we want it to be higher than 50%.
The board's not saying, this is my concern.
Yeah.
Okay, my
Well, it only
concern is,
makes
Can I
sense.
address
I
the-
think the board would be saying that.
Can I address the
It only
main
makes sense.
concern, which is the main concern is you want these kids to know the stuff,
yeah,
right? That's the big.
yeah, so we want them functionally.
So we have never had an issue with them not knowing this stuff. They've always known the core knowledge. Before this test, we were kind of ahead of the game, I would say. Before this was a law, we were doing this for years. We gave them the citizenship test. So we tested 100%. I shouldn't say 100% because maybe one or two missed it. We tested all of the students that we could at the end of the year as part of our SLO. Thank you. Our SLO, which was our individual goal as teachers. And we did that of our own volition. So they took the citizenship test at the beginning of the year, and they took the citizenship test at the end of the year. I don't have class by class results off the top of my head, but they knocked it out of the park every year.
So the citizenship test, they ace the citizenship test.
Yes, because we made
So
sure
so
that
this would
they
be like,
got
this would be like
knowledge.
a college board test.
Was 50% passing for the citizenship test?
The citizenship test, the official, the
60%.
60%. But
6 out of I thought.
6 out of 10.
They must answer 6 out of 10 questions correctly on the citizenship at 60%.
But when we gave them that test, there was a bank that they picked from for the citizenship test for the 6 out of 10. For us, we would give them a much larger group of questions that were from the citizenship test, and they did spectacularly well. So our students know their civic knowledge. So that was the main concern, I believe, Mr. Harley, if I'm right, which is that do they know the material? The answer is
But
yes.
every
they
student
do.
wasn't required to take it. I
This
mean,
was-
did every,
This was Mrs. Bro, this was years ago of our own choosing. I'm
but
referring back
but
to
every
that.
student was not required to take it.
Correct, there was no state law, there was no board directive, this was just our teachers did this. So me, so I did this, Mr. Mosgrove did this, when Mr. Brody, could you have a class? It was Ms. Nybert, I believe, had a class, Mrs. Manning here and there, depending on the year. So we got together and we gave them this test of our own. So we required it because it was part of our class.
so Wade,
Yes, sir.
you and Rob both kind of implied that you simply picked the PSSA model up and then applied it here. Does that mean that in order to perform at the,
More perfect union.
well, it would take a civics teacher to fill that in. Does that mean that to be proficient only requires a 50% score on the PSSA exams?
Keystone exams.
The Keystone exams,
Yes, but
okay. So,
they can be rather rigorous exams though. And
okay,
it's only, it's not as simple as like, it wouldn't be an F if you get 50%.
so my point is that I agree with Tom that 50% in this case is really not ultimately acceptable. I don't have a problem with using the concept of the 4 categories of trying to lay out where the students are as far as proficient, basic, what have you. But I guess my question then to all of the educators is 70% is usually a passing score for a regular test that you would administer in your program? Do we want to use something like that as a, Tim's
I
having
would
a
argue there's certain
conniption.
skills you want 100% mastery. If I'm teaching my kid how to cross the street safely, I want 100% mastery. I don't want 80%. That means 20% of the time they're going to get hit and killed.
Right.
So it depends on the context. And what I'm hearing is the social studies department is saying 50% mastery on this test is considered good enough.
But it's not.
And I guess the point is that, I think what you guys have done here is a good start. The 50% may be a good starting point, but from my perspective, and I think this is kind of where Tom's going, and maybe where Tim's going is, maybe we need to figure out what that ultimate level should be for this program, for this, does 70% and below put you, at the basic level? Okay. And I guess I'm not trying to dictate where it should be, although Tim's kind of giving us some direct guidance there. But, I think that's something that we should probably try to look at, is to figure out what those numbers should actually look like.
Yeah, I would say that it depends on what, I agree with Dr. Runge, like, depends on what you're trying to measure. If you're trying to measure basic knowledge of, the three houses or the three branches of government, or the two houses of Congress, and that low level knowledge, 100% needs to be where the number is. But if you're asking them to write an open-ended response to an article about foreign policy, that's a much higher rigorous, thing. So these things are part of this exam. So it's like, I think, and we can set, to your point, we can set that level of proficiency, whatever we want. There is no governance over that.
But to Tim's point, you could in fact, particularly with the ability to use your technology here, have certain questions where the bar for that's got to be at 98% or whatever, to what are the three branches of government and how do they function, that kind of a thing. Whereas maybe the essay question that you're talking about, maybe it only has to be at a 70% to be sufficient. So I think there could be a way to kind of accommodate what we're talking about, but not necessarily have the whole score be that, but rather have a subset of the score in the test for certain core knowledge versus the other part of it. So you were going to say something?
I want you to jump in. I'm tired of, yeah.
There are a couple of things that I observed tonight. We had that wonderful presentation from the junior high, middle school. Thank you very much. Middle school, about the progress that they're making with learning and the concept of understanding what they're doing and the rate of success going on in that building. That's going to come up to the senior high. That is going to move up through the process. So I think we can ask more of the students in social studies, in government, as that excellence. And I have to say it's excellence. What I've heard tonight was absolutely phenomenal with the success of those middle school students. And I know that as a teacher, I was very frustrated teaching history and government at the 9th grade level and having students only reading at the 4th grade level, because the concepts are difficult if you can't read. But I do think 50% is too low a bar. I really believe that, and I have complete faith in my former colleagues here. I've worked with, Mr. Burdick, I haven't worked with, but Mr. Duty and Mr. Neal, I have worked with. But I think that you can raise the bar. I like to think that democracy is difficult. It is one of the most difficult concepts to teach. It requires involvement by everyone. I think of my father-in-law, who only went to the 10th grade, but he never missed an election. He read the newspaper from the editorial page every night. He was a concerned citizen. If he can make it to 10th grade, he could pass this test. He could pass a citizenship test. So I'm saying, I think 50% is too low. I don't care what the key. We have always looked at excellence and going above and beyond in the Indiana Area School District. That's one thing that makes us stand out and be welcome at state conferences. So I think we can do better. I think 70%. I remember one time in my career when my entire building, well, not the entire building, 68% of the student body was on the honor roll. Now, to me, that was kind of a red flag that we weren't expecting as much from our students or giving them as much to achieve. I think these gentlemen can, and I like the concept, what he's doing here with having them relate to, but I do think that we can do better than 50%. I think it's very important.
Lisa Price raised her hand.
Yeah, so I think that I want to make sure we think about these tests as a representation of knowledge and not as every child needs to have the answer to all of these specific questions. What you're trying to evaluate is, does a child have the requisite knowledge at a particular level, but not, do they know all the answers to every single question on this particular test? So, for example, in speech language pathology, students have a national exam. They have to achieve about a 60% accuracy rate on that exam. Now, all of our students would just shriek and say, I made 60%, I've never made a 60% in my life. I get 90s and 95s, right? But it's not, you're trying to sample their knowledge. And this is, so unless you're going to design a test where, you know, you have a lot of validity and reliability data that show that that test is valid for the purpose of saying 70% is the benchmark that has to be achieved, or 80% or 90%, I think you're going to end up kind of shooting yourselves in the foot and having this huge range of kids who are not performing up to what your 70% or 80% or 90% standard is. And that's not really, again, I think that kind of throws the baby out with the bathwater in terms of the data. I think your point also is really important, that why are kids missing the question? Like, every question would need to be analyzed and look at, why are kids missing that question? Are they missing it because they are lacking comprehension or reading ability? Or so this test needs to be measuring content, not those other things. And until you can say that every child can read the test and has the reading comprehension ability, then you're assessing those skills plus knowledge. So I just caution you on saying, yes, this is a test that is, you know, should have an 80 or 90% accuracy rate for all kids.
I wonder if we, I agree, Dr. Price, it's a very good point. I'm wondering if, while I was listening to you speak, we have the Linkit system, and Linkit has analytics with it. If we took the test and built it into Linkit, could we flag certain questions as key assessment questions that we identify as a team to say, this is base knowledge, like this is the cross the street question. You have to get 100%, you have to get this one right, you know, and then give some more latitude to other questions that are more advanced, or measuring, you know, writing ability, or taking into consideration reading comprehension as well. So, I mean, it might be something that we could develop as we work through this test, to really focus in on that, on the key components, and then also with the link, you can see how long they spent on each question too. So if like, you might be able to see that some kids just failed because they went click, 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 submit, and then we know we have a different problem here. Instead of needing remediation here, maybe they need to, sit down and just have a conversation with someone about, bad decisions.
Right. Unless you have all those data analytics on each question and you can analyze why certain, you can see patterns, why a certain answer might have been given more often than others, then I don't think you want to that as an increase in percentage accuracy for passing. So I think there's just a lot more work to be done on the test and the design itself. And are these kids given accommodations if they're not proficient in reading? Are they been given this assessment read to them aloud, or?
The IEP would be, yeah,
Okay.
for sure. If they have specially designed instruction that says they get the test read aloud, then that would absolutely happen for sure. Or
Okay.
extended time,
That
whatever.
Right. Okay, that's good. And then what about the kids that Ange was talking about that don't have IEPs, but they still lack proficiency in reading? Then those kids should also, again, you don't want to be assessing their reading skills here. You want to be assessing their knowledge, their content knowledge of this particular area.
Agreed. I would suspect that those students show up in that 29 that we're remediating for sure.
So-
Unfortunately, I agree with you, but I would say that we haven't developed it to that point yet, for sure.
Speaking of the 29, if you have 29 that failed the test at 50%, below 50%, how many additional students would need to be remediated if you moved that bar up to 60? And how many would need to be remediated if you moved that bar up to 70? You have that data? You've got the student scores?
We do have the student scores, but I don't have them.
Because from 50 to 60, was it a significant number of students? Because you talked at one point about you doing the lowest, including the lowest part of the proficient basic students. Was that something that you thought about?
When I was talking to you before about what we used to do with the civics test, when we used to do the citizenship test, our students did across the board very, very well on that test. And that was teacher level data. So I know a lot about that data because that's data I had access to. And I had full control over being able to look at where my students were, whereas this is a different thing.
Well, this data is what I'm talking about. You have the data, and I'd be interested in knowing how many kids did 60, how many students did 60%?
That's a really good question.
So that 60 down to zero, how many students is that? 50 down to zero is 29. How many more students would need to be remediated if you raised that bar to 60?
It's a really good question. You're right.
And then 70. It'd be interesting to know out of the number of students that took the test.
I agree.
If I can add a second to what Dr. Price said, I think there's a difference between saying that we want all students to meet the state standards in civics and government and saying that we want all students to be good citizens versus saying that we want every student to answer every question correctly on a test. Those aren't the same thing. And I don't think there's any test that is constructed, whether it's an AP exam, a Keystone exam, the test that we take to become teachers, that the expectation is that any person is getting 100% of the questions correct. That's contrary to the way standardized tests are developed. So I think we need to be careful about confusing our goal, which is that all students are prepared to be good citizens, with let's try to set students up here on a test to have that test be more of an obstacle instead of demonstrating that students are making progress towards meeting the standards.
So I understand your point, Bill. But when you're looking, I think with the difference in the abilities, and even though Josie's right, hopefully the MTSS will eventually clear out a lot of this. Maybe there's a different way to, and to Tim's point, maybe there are certain things that need to be, we need to be sure of. Maybe you have two different ways of evaluating the test as far as what's considered proficient. And those two ways would be that you have maybe that, and I'm assuming 100-point question or 100 questions here. Okay, just for the sake of argument, what you guys would finally work out with, doesn't have to be this. But maybe the first 20 questions are the core issues that Tim was talking about that everybody has to get. Okay. And then maybe it is 50% of the last 80 questions. Okay. And that would help the student who maybe wasn't as strong in the reading, who wasn't as strong in some of the other aspects of studying the government, but yet he would have that, you would ensure that he had or she would have that basic core knowledge. On the other hand, the second way to evaluate it, particularly for the student, the A student or your one of your high flyers that misses one of those 20 questions, but scores an 85% or a 90% on the rest of the test, maybe that, and that to Lisa's point, they've certainly demonstrated their competency or their understanding of what you were trying to tell them in the civics, if they're getting that level of a score. So my point is that maybe there's a couple of different ways that these could be evaluated, so that regardless of the student's inherent abilities at the time they take it, there'd be two different ways to make sure that they have the core knowledge in a hard yes or no answer type of thing, but yet at the same time, if they score high enough, then the total score becomes the pass versus what they get on the rest of it.
Mr. Stripp, I'm sorry. Mr. Stripp, to your point, along with Dr. Runge's point and Mr. Heinrich's point, I believe that we have the capacity to do that, and we're going to be jumping ahead a little bit into my portion of the presentation, but that's okay. There are certain things that 100% of students should know. For example, and we don't have to hash through every single thing as a group here, but for example, how do you register to vote in Pennsylvania? I think we could all agree that 100% of students need to know that.
Yes.
Another point would be, where should you get reliable news information? I would say newspapers like the Post-Gazette or the New York Times as opposed to Facebook or Instagram. That's something I think we could all agree upon is important. Where things get a little more iffy is, tell me about the historical, social, political, and economic complexities between Israelis and Palestinians. I think that's something that would be, well, no, that's an example of foreign policy where maybe 100% of students don't need to know that, as opposed to registering to vote or good sources of media. So as Mr. Heinrich said, and this is jumping ahead to my portion of the presentation tonight, we can put that on Linkit, and we were able to flag which of those questions we think are extremely important and which ones are not. And kind of like you said, Mr. Schroth, the first 20 questions could be those really important concepts. The rest could be ones that aren't quite as important. It wouldn't even necessarily have to be the first 20, and that's the beauty of Linkit, that we're able to flag that.
I was doing it for the simplicity of explaining
I
it.
understand.
The 20 questions could certainly be scattered throughout the test. And again, the technology would allow you to grade those accordingly.
And Mr. Schroth, you're right about this. I want you to know too, this is what we're doing without identifying them. So I think we could identify it in the Linkit system. What Mr. Berg's saying is we could put those in and get more data back on that. And what I would say to what you're saying is this is what we are doing. We have a mix of foundational questions, and then we have more challenging questions on the test. So the reason those scores, we were talking about percentages. I agree with Mrs. Cunningham. I agree with all of you, Mrs. Rhodes, who shared that we should have high standards. The reason why the test we have lower percentages is because we have such high standards. So you have foundation, you have very easy questions on that test, I'm sure, that are, which branch of government makes the laws, right? And then you have more challenging questions as well. So that is the reason why you are seeing that. And what I would say here to kind of address the concern, I believe that's beneath a lot of this is, are the kids learning? And the answer is yes. And what Mr. Duty had said, I want to kind of piggyback on that a little bit and say, is it important that kids practice their skills of citizenship, having a respectful conversation with one another, like we're all doing right now? Yes. They have opportunities to do that in class in a structured way with a teacher who's helping them and facilitating discussion. Do they have the opportunity to practice those civic skills as well as reading, writing, speaking, and thinking skills? And the answer is yes. So this test, although very important, is only one component of what we are doing. And so this shows what, like Mr. Duty is saying, but the reality is the real work is done in the class, right? That teacher and student bond, that student to student bond, the idea that we're exchanging ideas and we're learning together. So that's really where we want to focus. And this should showcase that. This is a big part of that, of course. But I just want you to know that just from teachers who are teaching the course, that the kids are practicing their skills of democracy in the class. They're practicing their government and community-based skills in the classes. So we do this, we learn foundational knowledge, but we also learn those life skills that I think we all can agree, as Mr. Berg was saying, all these things that we can agree are important, like having a reasonable discussion, being able to respect one another, and being able to learn from each other too. Yes, absolutely.
I'm glad to hear you guys are, headed in this direction. There's no question in even doing some of it now. I think to simplify it, we just need to raise that bar. Whatever the bar is, I think that bar needs to go up.
I just have one comment, and I agree, it'd be nice to see it go up, but I think what you're saying is very important. Their knowledge and learning is important. I don't want to see us go back to we teach to test. That was a failed thing this government put out. And if we put a standard there and say, you have to do this, are you going to teach to test? Or are we going to teach the students? And I think we do have to figure a way to bring their scores up. But I don't ever want to see us put pressure on you to say you got to teach to test.
Well, it's not only the scores, but it's that we have confidence that these kids are functioning. And my concern is that you're telling me they are, but then we're giving them a 50% number. Okay, and that number is going to be out there.
That's one test.
Yeah, on one test.
We did.
I mean, how many students are passing the course?
It's hard.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Probably
That's teaching to test.
more than
That's what I'm saying. It's not
50%,
an easy
right?
test.
And the kids did very well when we gave them citizenship exams across the board. If you wanted a higher percentage,
No.
that would be very easy for us to give you a higher percentage.
And I think,
And you're right, what we want is we want functional citizens.
Yes.
I think the best idea is what Rob said, was put it in that link in. Figure out which questions all the students are either getting right or getting wrong.
yeah.
Make up the core ones that we want them to absolutely get and move from
Yeah,
there.
and there's one thing I can tell about these guys. This group of gentlemen is never going to be okay with being okay, right?
No.
We're always going to be developing this and making this whole system better. And I agree. I think there's an opportunity here for us to grow and maybe diversify. But I also think it might be beneficial if we reshare the test with all of you so you can familiarize yourself with it.
I don't want to take it.
It's not.
I looked at it a few years ago and
Yeah, this is not like,
It's really
we have raised the bar compared to a lot of our colleagues across the state. I mean, they're going with, hey, get 50% on this test down here, where we've already, at your direction, made it a much more rigorous test. So, and I'm not saying that I'm not arguing to keep it at 50. I'm okay with setting whatever standard you guys want to set. But I think looking and familiarizing yourself with the test might be beneficial as we move this conversation forward. So, but I do want to give these gentlemen an opportunity to finish the remediation piece, because I think that's the next step is what are we going to do about last year's kids before we worry about, next year's kids. But so someone else raised their hand. Dr. Price. Dr. Price?
I just wrote a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see it. Let's hold on. And my eyes are bad. High stakes tests need to be valid and reliable. When we design tests like this, it'll be high stakes. We should have a lot of questions that are perhaps too hard, but then make the percentage for passing lower. It's a better design. Yeah, thank you. I agree. I think we have to, obviously we'll continue to work for those, on what are those cross the street questions. I like that analogy. That's a really good, way to think about it. And then, what are those more advanced questions that we can ask that show mastery, and then maybe we can put that and link it and get some diagnostic data on it as well, so. But if you guys want to proceed, I don't know where we're here.
Yeah.
We were-
I think I derailed. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
The reassessment, Mr. Now begins Mr. Burdick's part of the presentation.
Thank you. So for each module, each student will receive 2 to 4 questions of what we call formative assessment or checking for understanding. It's a short progress check to make sure that the students grasp the content. And if you could continue to the other bullet points. So here's an example question of formative assessment.
If I were to read that, I'm going to read it for you.
If you could read it, because I can't even see it from where I am.
So select a statement that is true about the idea of peaceful transfer of power. A, the American system continued the historical tradition of peaceful transfer of power. B, the American system of peaceful transfer of power was a revolutionary idea in 1789. C, the early Americans believed that a single person should hold power until their death. Or D, at the end of his second term, George Washington refused to leave office.
And this is not a civics test for any of you guys. We're not putting you on the spot here, so you can go ahead and reveal the answer, Mr. Heiner. So the purpose of these quizzes, again, is to allow students to self-monitor and receive feedback. If you go 2 slides ahead, that will reveal the answer.
And is this the summative one then?
Yeah, this is still in the formative. Yep, this is progress check. So as of 1789, this was a radical idea that the United States had, peaceful transfer of power. If you look at other nation states of the world prior to 1789, there generally was not a mechanism for peaceful transfer of power. So this was something that the United States founders came up with. So again, we weren't putting you guys on the spot to try to answer those questions, but it does give you an example of the rigor of what we're looking for.
And history wants to repeat itself.
Right.
And to get to a point that I think you made, Ms. Brode, is that, yes, our threshold at 50% may not seem as high as it should be, but I would also say that our test is more difficult than the U.S. citizenship exam, although we are more than happy to raise that threshold to 60, 70% for sure.
Mr. Heiner, could you show the feedback that is on, go back 1 slide to show that if a student marks, this is something we like about, one of the reasons why we selected this way to remediate. There are some answers down here, there's some feedback that students can get if they mark an incorrect answer. The purpose of this this is not the test, this is the practice, right? So they put the wrong thing in there, and then there's specific feedback that says why that answer, why this isn't correct, and what more correct answer would be for that too, which is really a nice way to be able to do that.
For sure.
Okay, and if you could go to the next slide, and then the next slide.
What major point did President Bush make regarding how presidential power is transferred in the United States?
So this is an example question for the summative assessment, meaning the final test that they have to take upon conclusion of the course.
So if they didn't watch that video, they're not going to know the answer to that? Is that,
Because this is the remediation, they would have the opportunity to watch that video.
they would have the opportunity, but then they're given this question that if they didn't take the opportunity,
You're right.
then, so they need to
do the course.
they need to do.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's setting them up for failure. If they, well, you'd had the chance to look at it and you didn't do it, you failed.
And they need to be actively engaged in the course. to your
Right.
point,
Right.
in order to be successful in the summative
So-
assessment.
so-
Absolutely.
And do you all monitor that?
No.
The students
The
who are taking the
remediation?
the remediation point, who monitors that?
That's online and it just.
Well, we'll get into that
Okay.
in a little while, but
Sorry.
I have to say, I didn't watch the video, but I could tell right away that the other ones are really wrong. So
Well, and I didn't look at the answers. I knew it was that video and it just popped out because I thought it was optional for people that,
Those are not optional. That's
I
that
mean,
is,
the reading and the video in that section, that was optional, right?
well,
It
no,
was optional. They
none
had,
of it
they,
is optional. No, that's.
they had to do they had to watch the video.
Yes, we
Okay.
we built the
Okay.
course for them to, I mean, by had to, nobody has to do anything,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
they
they
would
would
have
also
to.
choose not to.
No, but if they
But-
want to be successful, they have to
Yes,
watch
to
the
be
video.
successful, they would need to, this is what we tried to do, was tailor it to the very specific thing. So that's why it's a 2-minute video and a very short article.
Yeah, yeah.
So the final point regarding reassessment, to earn a passing score, it has to be greater than 70% for the remedial course that we're describing to you tonight. The original Act 35 exam, which we talked about earlier, that's currently set at 50% to be considered to be proficient. And based on the feedback that you've given us tonight, we can raise that bar to whatever you desire, whether it be 60%, whether it be 70%, or a combination of the two where we're flagging really important questions within that Act 35 exam. And then if you could progress it to the next slide. Okay. So,
Wait,
no,
this
one back, please.
Sorry, got it.
So as of right now, 29 students meet the criteria for remediation. If we change that to 60 or 70%, then that number will be higher. So we do plan to have this entire course done and ready for student use during the second semester. The constraint is that we don't have the capacity for any of the social studies teachers to do that because of lack of room in our schedules. However, as was said earlier in the presentation when a question was asked, that can be done via the 10th period academic advisors. They would be able to monitor those students in completion of this course. Then if you go to the next slide, Mr. Heinrich.
The long-term one or the one after that?
Long-term.
Okay.
And this should be the final slide, actually. So we'd like to develop benchmark assessments for government to be administered via Linkit. So I did say earlier that it's eventually going to be talked about Linkit. So what's nice about Linkit, as Mr. Heinrich said, is that we're able to see exactly how long the students are spending on the content, whether they're just click, 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 and blow through it, or if they're actually spending some time with it. So that is part of our plan to put it on Linkit. Now, based on your direction tonight, we can also identify what we consider to be the most important content that we want 100% of our students to pass. So this does give us time to address any struggling students before they have to take the Act 35 exam. So by taking benchmark assessments throughout the year, we'll be able to identify who may not do well in the Act 35 exam, and we'll be able to give them in-time interventions to help get them ready for the Act 35 exam. And that hopefully reduces the number of students that need this post-test remedial course. We want to try to lower that number if at all possible. And that's the conclusion of the presentation. So at this point, if you have any additional questions for us, please feel free to ask.
I do. So the Act 35 requirements are not, there's no requirement about whether you have to pass the test or not. You just have to take it from the state.
According to the Commonwealth, that is
Right.
exactly right.
So-
You simply have to take the test. You don't have to pass it.
How much of a problem do you think it was with these people below 70%, I'm going to say? How much of an issue do you think it was that they weren't taking it seriously? That they weren't, I mean, did they
Because there's
know
no
that we're
high
making
stakes.
it a graduation requirement, that they have to pass this test? Well, the state doesn't say we have to pass it. Was there a general feeling among the students that, I don't have to, whatever?
A local requirement that we have in place here is that whatever score you receive on the Act 35 assessment is also your final exam grade for the course. So there is that built in.
And did they take it seriously and actually believe it?
Some did not. We know for a fact. We know for a
Okay, well,
fact
I
at
mean,
We
least.
stress to them to take it seriously, but you were correct, Mr. Heinrich, it's regardless of how we stress things, there are always people, you're right, who did not take it seriously.
Was it a large number, do you think? That the, you know,
I don't have
the
information about
29 and the additional
this
people below?
particular cohort. I don't have information on because I did not supervise this group. The
Okay.
groups that I have supervised in the past generally take it very seriously, with the exception of the time. I would say, I think the first time it was a hard transition for that.
Yeah.
But
Well,
when
it's a
I've,
new- it's a
when
new
I've,
thing.
yeah, when I have proctored it, most of them take it seriously, and we stressed to them to take it seriously. But there is a group who does not.
Yeah, I know of at least 2 students who did not take it seriously at all and are now going to be remediated and probably could have passed it had they put the effort in.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, all right.
Well, I want to go back to we don't have enough social studies people to monitor the remediation. When we talked about the junior high and the MTSS, we're obviously not expecting math teachers to monitor the literacy interventions. So why do we have to depend on other teachers to monitor social studies
We don't.
interventions?
We have some flexibility in the 10th period to make sure that if there's something that has to be monitored by a social studies teacher, it can be, you know.
Well, I think it should be. I mean, if it's social studies content and if the students have questions as they're working through it, you know, I know if I was monitoring it and they'd ask me a question, I wouldn't be much help to them or be able to really further explain a concept if they need something further explained.
We can work through the scheduling of that, you know, we're just looking
Well, I
at.
want to put more on them. Like, they have enough to do. I'm saying, is there a shortage of social studies teachers?
You're asking.
I'm asking.
You're asking us, is that, or are you asking, who are you asking
I'm
that question
asking
to?
anybody that knows.
My
or
answer
has
is,
in-
yeah, I mean, we have one vacancy in the department that we chose not to fill, and so our schedules are tight, yes.
If we had another person in the social studies position, would that make it easier to monitor the remediation, especially if we're going to raise the number and have more than 29 students who are going to need this remediation?
The answer to that is yes.
I think we should consider
Staffing.
staffing the social studies department. And because it's my understanding, and I think, I don't know if it was Wade, one of you presented, that you were having a teacher that's also certified, but is teaching science or whatever. Somebody's teaching one period of social studies here or there.
We are optimizing on our resources.
Which I'm not sure is the best case scenario for us.
We have over the last number of years, you know, all things being equal with candidates, we find successful candidates who have multiple certifications. That gives us the flexibility that.
It does, but I have issues with that, not with you, Wade.
I know.
You know, but anybody can test into anything except special education and
Jim.
and reading specialist. You have to, you know, so people are taking these tests so that they are more marketable, so that districts will hire them saying, okay, you can teach half a day of this and half a day of that, even though that person had zero training in how to teach social studies or how to teach science or how to teach whatever they're testing into. So, you know, if you're having people teach it, are they people who are truly trained in teaching social studies, or did they just take the test? And because they were able to pass that one test, they're teaching social
You
studies.
better get over 50% on that test.
Well, no, they probably did. I mean, it's like Lisa said, our state tests are low, the percentage, you know, their percentages are.
Dr. Rigg, that is a genuine concern.
That's not just.
I would say the individuals in our buildings who are certified to teach those courses, teach them with as much fidelity as any of our social studies teachers. However, they are individuals of other departments, and that does put a strain on
The other
the
part
other
too.
departments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, gentlemen, thank you. I know this has been a lot of work, and I appreciate it sincerely. You know, and for the committee's concern, it's not done. It's an ongoing process, and there are no rules other than I think as Michael said, they just have to take the test and we have to report the results to the state. That's the only rule. What we design here is our own standard, and that's what we can build, and we can keep rebuilding it until we get a product that we're all happy with and all content that, it measures what we want to measure. So we'll keep working at it. We'll keep bringing it back to you. Okay.
Thank you. Well, we want to thank the board too for all the interest that you have in social studies. We appreciate that.
Is that sincere?
And we know.
Said it is,
Yeah, no, it really is.
It really is.
Incredibly sincere, because we all know how important social studies is. And so we thank you for that. And we want to keep raising the bar as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, several.
Mr. Duty's been here
Several of our team went to a conference at UPJ about civics instruction in America and what a crisis it is, and how there's this disparity on what the state spends on civics education compared to what we spend on STEM education.
Right.
And it's 5% of our total resources is spent on all the social studies, and it's 56% of our resources are spent on STEM.
Right.
So it's whatever you prioritize is going to be, where you see growth. And we're getting to a point where we're going to reach a crisis in this country, if we're not there already, about, civic engagement and civic literacy. So, I think to answer Mr. Kerr's question, I think what Mr. Neal was saying was genuinely sincere, and it's.
I was a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
If I could say something, Ms. Cunningham, you talked about the importance of the democratic process, and taking a look at those social studies standards, you can really tell that they are a result of the democratic process, in as much as that there is so much room for interpretation. And the reason I bring that up is the work that these guys did, working through those standards, however general, and how much at times leave room for interpretation, but be able to align them with what they are teaching. Do something purposeful here that's consistent with the excellence that they do in the classroom. So I commend these guys.
And they carry a heavy load.
Yes. Yeah.
They carry a heavy load, I understand.
Thank you.
And I empathize.
So thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And the last thing on our agenda tonight, sir, is just an update from the buildings about some of the Veterans Day celebrations we have, which is a nice, segue into, civic literacy and America and our democracy. So Veterans Day, as you know, is this Friday. Our celebrations are happening Thursday. I just wanted to give Mrs. Eisenman and Dr. Minnick and Wade and Mr. Powers an opportunity to share some of the things happening. So, Aaron, if you'd start, please.
Sure. Eisenhower and Norseman have both chosen to have assemblies. We're going to have Eisenhower's in the morning at the junior high at around 10 a.m. The students will have a program in which they are presenting, and we invited parents and veterans to come, because we do have the luxury of the auditorium. So if you'd like to come as well, please feel free to join us. It'll be approximately an hour, and that gives me enough time to then get down to Horseman and do Horseman's at around 2:00 in the afternoon. So we're going to do that one. Again, it's a program where the students are presenting the information to the veterans. Again, we've invited veterans and that kind of thing. There we are a little more limited in the seating, but you're welcome to come as well. You might have to stand on the side, but hey, we'll all be there together. That's what's important, is that we honor the veterans and we are able to show them the respect that they deserve. We have some special bulletin boards up at Forest Man when you come in the door. There's some things for junior high that we're kind of piggybacking on, because they're doing those things, so we're not being redundant, but as far as decorations and things. So please feel free to join us.
What time would that be, Aaron, so I can send them email?
Eisenhower's is at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m., excuse me, and Forest Man's at 2 p.m.
Thank you, ma'am.
We also have an assembly scheduled for 8 a.m. There's a number of traditions. We'd like to decorate the front of the building with flags lined up along the street. The display case inside the lobby, and part of our assembly program, we have student readings, some musical components, video. We have a couple of guest speakers in honor of our veterans and of our guests, which you all invited to attend as well. We have a small breakfast offering with coffee, tea, and some treats down in the cafeteria. The assembly begins at 8. We anticipate that taking about 1 hour. And throughout the course of the week, classroom teachers are also invited just to touch upon the significance of Veterans Day. That's typically a social studies endeavor. And I think that pretty much summarizes junior high.
At senior high, I'd like to commend Casey Hoffman, who is one of our new social studies teachers, and Casey Williams, who is one of our new music teacher, but not new to teaching. Both of those teachers have done a tremendous job in organizing the event at the senior high school. Casey and Casey have come up with the idea of asking students to identify veterans and their family. They're gonna have a breakfast for them first thing in the morning. They also reached out to IUP ROTC as well as the larger community for veterans to join that as well. Following that breakfast, we will have 2 assemblies. And reason being is our auditorium will hold about 600 seats, but we have over 900 students in our building. So we will have 2 assemblies, during which time there will be musical selections. We have guest speakers. Our own Mr. Johnson, our operational principal at the senior high school, will be one of our speakers as a veteran, as well as a gentleman from ROTC. IUP ROTC will be doing that. They'll be doing a flag folding activity during the assembly as well. But again, also get a chance to stop by the senior high school. Casey and Casey have also developed Armed Forces display in our Creative Arts Center inside our Upper Commons area. It's very nice. They have artifacts for each of the armed services to pay tribute and respect. So the breakfast goes from 8 to 8:35, and then the first assembly, Michael, what did you say? 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. We go for about 40 minutes. I would imagine the second assembly will begin around 9:45, 9:50 to transition into other classes.
Split was really nice about that, so.
Casey, no.
And the band will be in the Veterans Day parade late?
Yes. So.
Very good.
I'll confirm that for you. But I saw the
And
practice.
this is parade.
Saturday.
Saturday.
It's on Veterans Day itself.
Always on Veterans Day.
It'll, they'll form up between 10:15 and 10:30. I think they shove off at 10:50 with the salute. The ROTC will fire their cannon and play taps right at 11 o'clock. And then the parade will continue to its conclusion. Hopefully it will not be raining like it was last year. The only band that made it was the Indiana High School in the pouring down rain.
Are we done with that?
Got a minute. I think so.
Okay, 1 minute. I went over to the junior high, met with the folks from Pittsburgh Stage on the, and I'm gonna recommend that we back off until we get a comprehensive plan from both the high school and the junior high school to figure out what's going on. Now, we asked some things. The senior high dimming board can run both LED lights and incandescent lights. The new dimmer boards can do that. There was some ways that we wouldn't have to rewire the whole world at the junior high school. There was a bunch of things, but what was concerning me is the proposal that we looked at was a really nice theatrical system. Better than the senior high school, which I was concerned about because the senior high school we should be running a 21st century system there, and we should be running a similar system but simpler at the junior high school. And what I saw was that there was no continuity between the two buildings. Okay, and if we're going to run if we're gonna run a theatrical education process, we need to have that conversation. And those two buildings need to come together and figure out what we need to do physically. We're not gonna spend $500,000 at the junior high, turn around and spend $600,000 at the high school. That's not in the cards. So we have to figure out ways to do this. There was nobody there from facilities. It was only staff, and Jared was there, I was there. And so until we get a better proposal, I recommend that we sit on it for, until we get a better proposal.
Who's gonna provide that?
Good question, but I don't think it's the board's job to provide.
No, I know, but where would that come from?
I think we're gonna have to get the drama people together and find out what it is they need compared to what they.
Both schools, both
Both schools, we'll get them together and we'll have a
There are
conversation.
things at the senior high school that were done 20 years ago that we were told that they can't do at the junior high school. Okay, and that doesn't, it just didn't make sense. So things weren't adding up. And if we had $500,000 and we had another $500,000, then that'd be great, and we could do whatever we wanted to do. But I don't think it's a good spending of our resources to spend that kind of money at the junior high school without taking into consideration academically the situation at the senior high school.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Jared also asked the gentleman from the Pittsburgh Lighting for several quotes. And the only reason it's not on the agenda this evening is he doesn't have them
Right.
yet.
Right,
So-
and the questions were complicated because there wasn't anybody there from the high school. And so when we would ask a question about the high school, for example, we could buy a Fresnel light that is an LED light, and we can dial the color and the intensity. And the board, you can go from Q1 to Q2, and that light changes color and intensity. And that light will take the place of a dozen incandescent lights doing the same thing. But that light should be at the senior high school, and probably should be eventually at the junior high school. But the lights at the junior high school could be incandescent lights with gels the old-fashioned way. Okay, and the senior high would have these really sophisticated lights, and learn the basics at the junior high, and then sing and dance at the senior high is my concept. Technology is there, and so we just need to take a deep breath on this. We don't need to panic to go committing to spending that kind of money that we're being asked to spend. We'll keep replacing incandescent light bulbs as long as they make them.
What about the rewiring? They talked about having to rewire the whole thing. That's
Well,
fine.
it turns out that you could rewire,
But you don't have to.
or they make a fixture that you don't have to rewire.
Okay, I didn't think. you
And
would
one
have
of the
to
problems was that the system that they were proposing for the house would allow us to address almost every light individually. Okay, and all I need to do is turn the lights off and on and maybe dim them down. Okay, we don't. But at the same time, I said there's 120 light bulbs in that sucker. It's a mess. The auditorium's that big. Okay?
Sure.
So again, when we pressed Pittsburgh Stage, there was ways of accomplishing it. The electrician was there, and he said we could do it this way or that way. And by the time I got done with it, I was confused as all get out. Okay.
Is there any feasibility in taking the board and the equipment, whatever, at the high school, moving it down to the junior high?
Asked the question, we don't know. Okay. That's one of the questions that they should answer. Now, at the same time you say that, the board and the board is 20 years old at the high
Yeah,
school.
technology is so much different.
And it turns out that may not be the most expensive one. Okay, that you could buy a board for 10,000, that for 20,000 you can maybe do that. Okay, you could have a modern board. And it turns out a modern board will run both incandescent and LED light. Okay, so all I'm doing is reporting that I don't know what we're doing.
We'll figure it out.
Terry runs a strict ship. Okay, I'm surprised he stayed this long. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
I see you, Gary.
I know, I'm ready to go out the door. You need to tie your shoe too. Why
I
not
know.
just untie it?
Oh,
What's that
it's already
for?
over.